My husband looked me right in the eye at our dining table and said he could no longer lie to himself. He told me my younger sister was the woman he truly wanted. He expected me to shatter into a million pieces. He expected me to fight. Instead, I handed him a pen to sign his life away. He walked out thinking he had taken my house, my money, and my pride. He had no idea that exactly 3 years later I would be sitting across a corporate boardroom table as the CEO of a top 500 company, ready to seize everything he ever owned. The look on his face when he realized I owned his crushing debt was priceless. My name is Clara. I am 33 years old, and I spent years funding the delusions of a man who thought loyalty was optional. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to outsmart a family that tried to use you as their personal ATM. The silver fork hit the porcelain plate with a sharp clink that sliced right through the heavy Thanksgiving air. I sat at the head of the table in the sprawling four-bedroom colonial house I had paid the down payment on, watching the man I had been married to for 4 years refuse to look at me. Derek cleared his throat, his knuckles turning white as he gripped his wine glass. He was 35, dressed in a cashmere sweater I had bought him for his birthday, running a logistics startup that had been bleeding capital for 18 months. Beside him sat my younger sister Audrey. She was 30, wearing a designer silk blouse that looked suspiciously familiar. "I cannot keep lying to myself," Derek finally said, his voice breaking the suffocating silence of the dining room. He shifted his gaze not to me, but to the roasted turkey in the center of the table. "Clara, I want a divorce, and it is because of Audrey. Your sister is the one I really want." For a span of 10 seconds, the only sound was the low hum of the refrigerator. I did not drop my fork. I did not gasp. I slowly wiped the corners of my mouth with a linen napkin, letting the words settle into the expensive mahogany furniture. Audrey immediately let out a rehearsed fragile sob. She reached over, placing her hand over his. "Clara, I am so sorry. We never meant for this to happen. It was an accident. We were just comforting each other when you were away on those endless business trips. I tried to stop it. I really did, but we just fell in love." I stared at her hand resting on his. On her wrist was a diamond tennis bracelet, the exact same one I had seen on my joint credit card statement 3 weeks ago, categorized under corporate client gifts for his failing startup. "An accident," I repeated, my tone entirely devoid of the hysteria they were clearly bracing for. "Like tripping and falling into my husband's bed. Do not speak to your sister like that." My mother, Patricia, slammed her wine glass down at the other end of the table. At 60, she still wore her authority like a weapon, always ready to draw it in defense of her youngest child. "This is exactly why he is leaving you, Clara. Look at you. Cold. Calculating. You treat this marriage like one of your financial spreadsheets. You are 33 years old, and you practically live at your office. What did you expect a red-blooded man to do when he comes home to an empty house?" "I expected him to honor his vows, Mother," I replied flatly, refusing to let my voice rise. "But I suppose loyalty is a depreciating asset in this room." Derek puffed up his chest, emboldened by my mother's defense. "It is not just the hours, Clara. It is how you make me feel. You emasculate me. Every time my company needs a bridge loan, you look at me like I am a bad investment. Audrey looks at me like I am a visionary. She supports my dreams. She actually wants to build a home, a family, things you never had time for." I leaned back in my chair, studying the three of them. This was not a confession. It was an ambush. They had planned this. They had waited until I had cooked the meal, hosted them in my home to corner me and frame my devastation as my own fault. So I began folding the napkin perfectly into a square. "You want to build a life with my sister. That is the bottom line." "Yes," Derek said, his chin lifting defensively, "and my lawyers have already drawn up the preliminary paperwork. I want this done quietly. I do not want a bloodbath, Clara. A bloodbath requires me to care enough to bleed," I said softly, standing up from my chair. "You do not need lawyers to drag this out, Derek. If you want her, then have her. Audrey looked up, her fake tears suddenly drying as confusion crossed her face. Wait, just like that. You are not going to fight us. Fight for what, Audrey? I smiled, picking up my wine glass and taking a slow, deliberate sip. A man who uses my credit score to buy you jewelry. I do not fight over bad debts. I write them off. Derek flushed a deep, ugly shade of crimson. He hated when I spoke in financial terms. It reminded him of the glaring reality he spent every waking moment trying to outrun. I was the breadwinner, and his visionary startup was a financial black hole. He wanted to be the alpha male, the provider, but the truth was written on every bank statement he tried to hide from me. See? Patricia pointed an accusing finger at me, her voice trembling with theatrical outrage. Everything is money to you. This is about love, Clara. But since you brought up assets, we need to talk about the practicalities. Audrey is going to need stability. Derek has a company on the verge of a massive breakthrough, but all his liquid capital is tied up in research and development. It is only fair that you leave them the house. I paused halfway to the kitchen, turning to look at my mother. I felt a cold, sharp clarity wash over my brain. You want me to leave the house? The house I put the $200,000 down payment on. To my cheating husband and the sister he is currently sleeping with. You have a six-figure salary, Patricia argued, not missing a single beat. You can afford a luxury condo downtown, closer to your precious office. Audrey has a modest income from her influencer sponsorships. She cannot afford a mortgage in this neighborhood. Be the bigger person for once in your life. You have always been so selfish with your success. You never share the spotlight. Audrey chimed in, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. We just want a fresh start, Clara, and keeping the house would mean so much to us. It is where our love grew. The audacity was so spectacular it practically sparkled in the dining room light. They were not just stabbing me in the back. They were asking me to pay for the dry cleaning to wash my blood off their clothes. Derek pulled a folded document from his blazer pocket. I brought an intent to settle agreement. If you sign it relinquishing your claim to the property and the joint savings, I will not ask for alimony. I actually laughed out loud. It bubbled up from my chest, cold and sharp. Alimony. On what grounds, Derek? You have been draining our joint account for 2 years. I was legally your dependent for tax purposes last year. He shot back, his eyes narrowing with a nasty glint. I can make this very messy in court, Clara. I can freeze your personal accounts. I can drag your name through a contested divorce. I can make sure your company board hears about our messy personal life. Or you sign this, you pack a bag, and you walk away clean. I walked slowly back to the table. I looked at the document. It was basic, drafted by some cheap strip mall lawyer, essentially a blanket waiver of my rights to the marital home and the $50,000 left in our joint account. My phone vibrated in the pocket of my slacks. I pulled it out. A text message lit up the screen. It was from Jasmine, my older brother's wife. Jasmine was a ruthless, brilliant African-American mergers and acquisitions attorney who worked at one of the top corporate firms in Chicago. She was the only person in this family who actually respected me, and she never missed a trick. The text from Jasmine read, "Liam just told me what your mother was planning for tonight. Do not fight them for the house. I repeat, let them have the house. Check your email. Look at the mortgage restructuring Derek did behind your back last month." Keeping my face completely neutral, I tapped my email app. Jasmine had pulled the property records. My eyes scanned the highlighted legal document on my screen. 3 weeks ago, Derek had forged my signature to refinance the house, pulling out $100,000 in equity to dump into his failing company. But worse, he had not just refinanced. To get the cash out with his terrible credit score, he had switched our secure fixed-rate mortgage to an aggressively predatory adjustable-rate mortgage. The introductory teaser rate was ending in exactly 45 days. When it did, the monthly payments were scheduled to balloon from $3,000 a month to an unsustainable $9,500 a month. Coupled with the local property tax reassessment happening in January, the house was not an asset anymore. It was a ticking financial time bomb waiting to detonate. I looked up from my phone. Derek was watching me, a smug, self-satisfied smirk playing on his lips. He thought he had outsmarted me. He thought he was taking my castle. "You want the house?" I asked, keeping my voice deceptively soft. "It is the least you can do," Audrey whimpered, leaning her head onto his shoulder. I reached across the table, took his expensive pen from his hand and uncapped it. I did not hesitate for a single second. I scrawled my signature across the bottom of the intent to settle waiver. My mother let out a loud sigh of relief. Derek looked genuinely shocked. He clearly had not expected me to surrender without a massive legal bloodbath. "It is yours," I said, tossing the pen onto the turkey platter. "The house, the joint account, and the cheating husband. Congratulations, Audrey. You have won. You are making the mature choice here, Clara," Patricia said, her tone instantly shifting from hostile to patronizing. "In a few years you will look back and realize this was for the best. You were never meant to be a wife anyway. You are a career woman. Audrey is built for family life." I did not bother to respond. I simply turned on my heel, walked past the dining table with its ruined Thanksgiving dinner, and headed straight for the grand staircase. My posture was impeccably straight. I did not run. I did not stumble. I felt an overwhelming sense of calm washing over my entire body. It took me exactly 20 minutes to pack my life into 2 large suitcases. I packed my tailored business suits, my designer shoes, my laptop, and my personal jewelry. I left the expensive wedding dress hanging in the back of the closet. I left the photo albums gathering dust on the shelf. I even left the ridiculous set of matching his and hers embroidered towels Audrey had gifted us for Christmas last year. They could use them to wipe away their tears when the bank came knocking. When I dragged my luggage back downstairs, the 3 of them were sitting in the living room. They were drinking my expensive scotch, talking in hushed, excited tones about remodeling the master bathroom. They stopped the moment my heels clicked against the hardwood floor. Leaving tonight, Derek asked, a sickening hint of fake sympathy in his voice. "You can stay in the guest room until the weekend if you need time to find a hotel." "I would rather sleep on a subway grate," I replied smoothly, pulling the handle of my luggage up. I stopped at the front door and looked back at my sister. She was curled up on the leather sofa, holding my husband's hand, looking at me with a mixture of pity and triumph. "Audrey," I called out. She blinked, sitting up slightly. "Enjoy the house. I genuinely hope it brings you everything you deserve." Before she could respond, I opened the heavy oak door and walked out into the freezing November night. I loaded my bags into the trunk of my Audi, got into the driver's seat, and locked the doors. The moment I turned the key in the ignition, my phone buzzed. It was Jasmine calling. I put the phone on speaker as I pulled out of the driveway. "Tell me you did not fight them for the property," Jasmine said, her sharp, authoritative voice filling the car. As a high-powered mergers and acquisitions lawyer, my African-American sister-in-law did not do small talk. She only dealt in facts and winning strategies. I signed the waiver, I told her, turning the car heater on. "They get the house and the joint account." Derek agreed to waive alimony in exchange. Jasmine let out a dark, rich laugh. "Perfect. Let me break down exactly what your ex-husband just won. When I pulled the property records tonight, I found the new deed and the loan origination documents. Derek forged your signature 3 weeks ago to refinance the house. He pulled out $100,000 in equity to keep his pathetic logistics startup afloat for a few more months. I kept my eyes on the dark road ahead. And the mortgage terms." "Absolutely suicidal," Jasmine replied, her tone dripping with professional disgust. To get the cash out with his abysmal credit history, he had to use a shady private lender. He switched your secure fixed-rate mortgage to a predatory adjustable-rate mortgage. The introductory teaser rate expires in exactly 45 days. When that happens, the monthly payment will skyrocket from $3,000 to $9,500 a month. I smiled at my reflection in the rearview mirror. Derek takes home barely $4,000 a month from his failing company. Audrey makes maybe $2,000 from her minor brand deals. Exactly, Jasmine said. And it gets better. The city is doing property tax reassessments in January. Based on the market value of that neighborhood, their property taxes are about to double. They are going to be bleeding $10,000 to $12,000 a month just to keep the lights on. I could report the forged signature to the police. I mused aloud, tapping my fingers on the steering wheel. You could, Jasmine agreed. But if you claim fraud right now, the bank will freeze the asset, unravel the loan, and you will be tied up in a messy legal battle over a house you do not even want. By signing that settlement waiver tonight, you legally transferred all liability of that toxic debt directly onto Derek. You are totally clean. Let him drown in the ocean he filled himself. You are brilliant, Jasmine. I charge $1,000 an hour for a reason, Clara. Now go check into a 5-star hotel order room service and celebrate. You just dropped 200 pounds of dead weight. I ended the call as I merged onto the highway heading toward downtown Chicago. The city skyline loomed ahead, bright and full of endless possibilities. I had left my home and handed over my savings, but as I pressed down on the gas pedal, I had never felt so wealthy. I pulled up to the valet stand at a luxury hotel downtown. I handed over my keys and let the bellhop take my 2 suitcases. Checking into a corner suite overlooking the Chicago River was not just a luxury, it was a strategic reset. I ordered a bottle of expensive champagne and a steak from room service. I sat by the floor-to-ceiling windows watching the city lights and began drafting my battle plan. By 6 the next morning, I was awake and operating with surgical precision. I opened my laptop and logged into my banking portal. I transferred every single cent of my personal savings into a brand new account at a completely different banking institution. Then I called the 3 major credit bureaus and placed a hard freeze on my social security number. Derek had forged my signature once for that disastrous mortgage. I was absolutely not going to give him the opportunity to open a credit card in my name when his adjustable rate started drowning him. I canceled the joint credit cards. I removed myself as an authorized user from his accounts. I severed every financial artery that connected me to him. At exactly 9:00, my phone rang. It was my mother. I let it ring 3 times before finally answering. Clara, she began, her voice carrying that familiar tone of demanding expectation. Audrey was just looking at the utility bills. Since you are the primary account holder for the electricity and the water, we need you to keep paying them through the end of the year. It is the holidays, and Derek is between funding rounds. It is the decent thing to do for family. I took a slow sip of my black coffee. Mother, I signed over the house. I did not sign a lifelong adoption paper for a 35-year-old man and his mistress. I called the utility companies an hour ago. The accounts in my name are being shut off at noon today. If Derek wants the lights on, he needs to open an account in his own name. Assuming they do not run a credit check, of course. Patricia gasped loudly into the receiver. You are being completely unreasonable. You are trying to freeze your own sister out of her home. Audrey is sensitive. She cannot handle this kind of stress right now. You have always been so vindictive when things do not go your way. I am not being vindictive, Mother. I am being legally compliant. I no longer live at that address. Paying utilities for a property I do not reside in or own would be highly irregular. Tell Derek to use the $100,000 he pulled from the home equity to pay the heating bill. Oh wait, he dumped that into his sinking ship of a startup, did he not? Before my mother could stammer out a defense, I ended the call and blocked her number. I proceeded to block Audrey and Derek as well. The communication blackout was officially in effect. Over the next month, I finalized the divorce paperwork through Jasmine. Derek did not contest a single clause. He was too busy playing house with my sister and bragging to his friends about the property he had scored in the settlement to realize the legal noose he had slipped around his own neck. The judge signed the final decree, and I was officially a free woman. Without the dead weight of a failing husband draining my resources and my energy, my career accelerated at a terrifying pace. I took a massive risk. I resigned from my comfortable corporate executive job and founded my own financial technology company. I used the money I had protected to bootstrap the initial software development. I worked 18-hour days. I slept on a cheap sofa in a rented co-working space. I pitched to venture capitalists who doubted me, and I built an algorithm that predicted supply chain financial volatility better than any established firm on Wall Street. Every time I felt exhausted, every time I wanted to quit, I pictured Derek and Audrey sitting at my dining table, demanding the fruits of my labor. That image was pure, unadulterated rocket fuel. I was no longer playing their game. I was building an entirely new board. While I was securing my first major corporate clients, the financial trap Jasmine had pointed out finally snapped shut on my ex-husband. I heard through Jasmine that the introductory rate on the house expired just after the new year. Their monthly payments tripled overnight just as the new property tax assessments hit the mailboxes. But I did not care. I was too busy scaling my startup to look back at the wreckage they created for themselves. The next 3 years would be a blur of aggressive expansion, sleepless nights, and unprecedented success. I was building an empire, and I was doing it entirely on my own terms. 3 years is a remarkably short amount of time when you are busy building an empire, but an absolute eternity when you are drowning in debt. I stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows of my corner office in downtown Chicago, looking out over the city that had become my personal playground. The sleek glass and steel room was a far cry from the cheap co-working space where I had spent my first few months post-divorce. My name was now etched on the double glass doors of a financial technology firm that had just broken into the top 500 fastest-growing private companies in the country. We were not just predicting supply chain financial volatility anymore. We were setting the industry standard. I turned away from the window and walked back to my desk, running a hand over the polished mahogany surface. My algorithm had caught the attention of major global logistics conglomerates who were desperate to optimize their routing costs. While my ex-husband was busy pretending to be a tech visionary with a business model that made absolutely no sense, I had quietly built a software that actually solved billion-dollar problems. I now had a staff of 70 brilliant data analysts working under me. My wardrobe had upgraded from practical business casual to custom-tailored designer suits that projected absolute power and control. I had stripped away every ounce of the accommodating wife I used to be, leaving only the sharp edges of a chief executive officer who did not take no for an answer. Jasmine had remained my closest confidant and my most lethal weapon. She officially joined my advisory board during our seed funding round, bringing her ruthless corporate legal expertise to my growing operation. During our weekly lunches, she would occasionally drop a carefully curated update on the disaster I had left behind. Derek and Audrey were barely surviving. They had lost the house to foreclosure exactly 14 months after I walked out. The ballooning mortgage payments and the doubled property taxes had chewed them up and spit them out. They were currently renting a cramped 2-bedroom apartment in an undesirable neighborhood, while Derek desperately tried to pitch his failing startup to any low-level investor who would take his call. Audrey had lost half her social media followers after attempting to pivot her brand into a luxury lifestyle influencer, a narrative that completely fell apart when her credit cards started declining at local boutiques. I did not feel pity for them. I felt absolutely nothing. My focus was entirely consumed by the next major milestone for my company. We were entering our Series A funding round, and the stakes had never been higher. I needed $50 million to scale our server infrastructure and expand into European markets. The pitch meetings were grueling. I was sitting across the table from some of the most aggressive venture capitalists in the country, men who scrutinized every decimal point in my financial projections. But I was ready for them. I knew my company was a goldmine, and I refused to give up a single percentage of equity for anything less than exactly what it was worth. It was a Tuesday morning, and the office was humming with intense, focused energy. My executive assistant brought me a fresh espresso and handed me the final briefing binder for a massive pitch scheduled for that afternoon. We were slated to meet with one of the most prestigious investment firms in the city. Getting their backing would not just secure our Series A, it would instantly legitimize my company on a global scale. Everything was meticulously prepared. The slide deck was flawless. The financial models were ironclad. I took a sip of the dark, bitter coffee and felt a surge of absolute confidence. There was not a single variable I had not accounted for, or so I thought. My desk phone rang. It was not the standard internal chime from my assistant. It was the private direct line I only gave to my executive board and Jasmine. I picked up the receiver, keeping my eyes on the financial projections in front of me. "Clara speaking," I said smoothly. It was Jasmine, and for the first time in the 3 years I had known her, she sounded genuinely alarmed. "Clara, you need to turn on your computer right now and go to the social media tracking dashboard." I paused, the pen in my hand freezing above the paper. "What is going on, Jasmine?" "Just look at it," she replied, her voice tight and clipped. "Audrey just went live and she is using your name. And worse, she tagged every major venture capital firm in the city. The investors you are meeting with at 2 o'clock just saw it." I dropped the pen and immediately reached for my mouse. I pulled up the social media tracking dashboard my public relations team used to monitor the company brand. Right at the top of the feed was a live video from Audrey. She was sitting in what looked like a dimly lit, cramped bedroom. Her blonde hair was intentionally messy, and she was wearing a cheap, oversized gray sweater to emphasize her supposedly dire financial situation. The caption flashing across the bottom of the screen read, "The ugly truth about my billionaire sister." I hit the play button. Audrey stared directly into the camera, her eyes wide and brimming with perfectly timed tears. "Hi, everyone," she sniffled, wiping her cheek with the sleeve of her sweater. "I never thought I would have to bring my family trauma to the internet, but we are completely desperate. 3 years ago, my sister Clara walked out on her marriage. She chose her ruthless ambition over her own husband. She is a cold, barren woman who cares more about corporate profits than human lives. And now that she is running a massive financial technology company, she is using her wealth to completely destroy us out of pure spite." I watched, my expression entirely blank as my sister spun a web of absolute fiction. Audrey claimed that I had tricked Derek into taking on a toxic mortgage right before abandoning him. She told her viewers that we were forced out of our home and left on the streets while Clara bought luxury penthouses. But then came the true poison, the part that was designed to do actual corporate damage. And the worst part, Audrey cried, her voice cracking for dramatic effect, is that her entire company is built on a lie. The core algorithm she uses to secure those massive contracts. She stole the concept from my husband's private research notes. He is a brilliant tech visionary, and she robbed him blind. We are living off cheap noodles while she makes millions off his stolen intellectual property. I paused the video. Below the frame, I scanned the tags. Audrey had deliberately tagged every single venture capital firm I had been courting for my Series A funding. She had tagged prominent financial news outlets and tech blogs. The video already had over 500,000 views, and the comment section was rapidly turning into a digital mob calling for a boycott of my company. My public relations director was blowing up my internal messaging system, begging for permission to release a defensive statement. I ignored the messages. Defensive statements only validate the attacker. My office door suddenly opened. My executive assistant walked in, looking visibly pale and clutching a tablet. "Ms. Clara," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "The lead partner from the investment firm just called. They saw the video on their social media feeds." "And what did they say?" I asked, keeping my voice perfectly calm. "They are asking to postpone the 2 o'clock meeting indefinitely." He swallowed hard. "They said they are highly sensitive to public relations scandals." The lead investor specifically cited the intellectual property theft claim. He told me that until the ownership of the algorithm is legally resolved, they cannot risk committing $50 million to a founder facing these kinds of allegations. I leaned back in my leather chair. $50 million in expansion capital was currently hanging by a thread because my sister decided to play the professional victim on the internet. I knew exactly what this was. Derek had put her up to this. His own startup was completely dead, so he decided to try and extort mine. He knew he had no actual legal leg to stand on regarding the intellectual property, so he was using the court of public opinion to terrorize my investors and force me into a desperate financial settlement. "Are you still there?" Clara Jasmine asked, through the phone speaker, breaking my train of thought. "I am here," I said, my voice completely level. They postponed the meeting. Audrey just threw a massive roadblock into our Series A. "This is defamation per se," Jasmine stated, the sharp, aggressive edge of the corporate lawyer coming out. "She is directly accusing you of corporate theft and financial crimes to millions of people. But a standard civil lawsuit for defamation will take months to litigate, and you need that funding secured this week." "I do not want a long lawsuit, Jasmine," I said, turning my chair to look out at the city skyline. "I want an execution. I want that video taken down immediately, and I want them to issue a public retraction." "What do we have on them?" Jasmine let out a low, dangerous laugh. "Oh, we have plenty. I have been doing some quiet digging into Derek's failed business. I have a contact at the Internal Revenue Service who confirmed a few very interesting details about his accounting practices. Just give me 10 minutes to draft the paperwork." 10 minutes was exactly what it took. I did not move from my desk. I simply watched the live viewer count on my sister's broadcast continue to climb. She was weeping now, putting on an Oscar-worthy performance about how they could not afford groceries while I was allegedly stealing their intellectual property. My phone chimed. Jasmine had forwarded me a copy of the legal notice she just fired off. It was not sent to my sister. It was sent directly to the public email address of the management agency that still foolishly represented Audrey, with a direct copy to Derek and Audrey themselves. I opened the document. It was an absolute masterpiece of corporate aggression. Jasmine had drafted a formal cease and desist letter demanding the immediate removal of the video and a full public retraction. But the real weapon was hidden in the second paragraph. Jasmine laid out cold, hard facts. She stated that we were in physical possession of bank statements proving Derek had misclassified over $60,000 in personal luxury purchases as corporate business expenses. She specifically highlighted the diamond tennis bracelet Audrey was wearing in the video, noting it had been written off as a corporate client gift on a tax return. Jasmine made the stakes incredibly clear. If the video was not deleted within 10 minutes, she would not just file a civil lawsuit for defamation per se. She would forward the complete file of Derek's fraudulent accounting practices directly to the Criminal Investigation Division of the Internal Revenue Service. She also mentioned that tax evasion carries severe federal prison time and that the Internal Revenue Service absolutely loves an easy conviction with a clear paper trail. I kept my eyes on the screen. The clock on my computer monitor ticked forward. 1 minute passed, then 2. On the video, I saw Audrey suddenly glance off camera. Her expression immediately shifted from tragic sorrow to sheer panic. Someone, presumably Derek, was frantically showing her a phone screen. The live feed abruptly went black. A message popped up saying the broadcast had ended. 5 seconds later, the entire video disappeared from her profile. The internet mob was instantly cut off from their source material. I picked up the phone to call Jasmine. "The video is gone," I said. "Of course it is," Jasmine replied, her tone dripping with intense professional satisfaction. "Bullies always fold when you show them the actual consequences of their actions. Derek knows he has been committing tax fraud for years to fund their lifestyle. He thought he could use public pressure to extort you because he has zero legal leverage. The moment I threatened his actual freedom, he forced her to pull the plug." "It is not enough," I said, leaning back in my heavy leather chair and looking at the blank screen. "The video is down, but the damage is already done. The investment firm already pulled out of the 2:00 meeting. They are spooked. In the world of venture capital, even the quiet whisper of stolen intellectual property is enough to kill a $50 million deal. We need a public retraction from Audrey to clear my name completely." Jasmine sighed loudly through the speaker. "Clara, forcing a public retraction will take a court order. We can absolutely get it, but it will take weeks to move through the legal system. These investors want a clean slate right now. You might have to write this specific firm off and start pitching your Series A to other funds." I felt a tight knot form in my stomach. I had spent 6 grueling months preparing for this specific pitch. My company needed this massive capital injection to launch our European servers before our international competitors beat us to the market. Derek and Audrey had not just caused a minor public relations inconvenience, they had actively sabotaged the financial future of my business. I am not starting over, I told Jasmine firmly, my grip tightening on the edge of my desk. I built this company from nothing. I am not letting 2 unemployed frauds derail my funding. Before Jasmine could offer another legal strategy, my private line beeped with an incoming call. I glanced at the caller identification display. It was a number I had blocked 3 years ago, but somehow the caller was being routed through the main company switchboard. It was my mother. Hold on, Jasmine, I said. Patricia is calling the office. She must have bypassed the front desk by claiming it was a family emergency. Put her on speaker, Jasmine said instantly, the lawyer in her ready for a fight. I want to hear every single word of this. I pressed the speaker button. Hello, Mother, I said, keeping my voice completely devoid of any emotion. Clara! My mother breathed, her voice frantic and totally breathless. Thank God I got through to you. You need to call off your attack dogs right now. Audrey is hyperventilating on the bathroom floor and Derek is screaming about the federal government. What did you do to them? I did exactly what I promised I would do 3 years ago, Mother, I said, keeping my tone perfectly measured. I protected my assets. Your golden child and her fraudulent husband tried to extort a top 500 company. They brought a plastic knife to a corporate gunfight. Patricia let out a shrill, hysterical noise that grated against the quiet elegance of my office. It was just a little video, Clara. She is under so much stress. The landlord is threatening to evict them at the end of the month. Derek has been working day and night trying to get his logistics company off the ground, and you are sitting in your glass tower hoarding your millions. Audrey was just venting her frustration. You did not have to threaten them with federal prison. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the polished mahogany desk. That little video just cost my company a $50 million investment meeting. So unless Derek has $50 million hidden in his offshore accounts to compensate my board of directors, the legal notice stands. In fact, he is lucky I only sent a cease and desist. You are a monster, Patricia hissed, her voice dripping with venom. You have always been a cold, unfeeling machine. Your sister is practically destitute. They had to sell her diamond tennis bracelet last week just to make rent. Oh, you mean the bracelet Derek bought with my credit score and wrote off as a corporate client gift? I shot back smoothly. The one he committed tax fraud to purchase. That bracelet. There was a sudden heavy silence on the other end of the line. Patricia was not expecting me to know the granular details of Derek's financial crimes. She tried to pivot, resorting to the same emotional manipulation she had used my entire life. You are destroying this family over money, Clara. You have more than enough wealth. Why can you not just let them have a little piece of the pie? You owe your sister some grace after everything she has been through. At that exact moment, Jasmine decided she had heard enough. This is Jasmine Patricia, my sister-in-law announced through the speakerphone. Her voice was sharp enough to cut glass. I highly recommend you advise your son-in-law to hire a federal defense attorney immediately. And just as a professional courtesy, if you have been receiving any cash gifts or financial support from Derek over the past 3 years, you might want to retain counsel yourself. The Internal Revenue Service will meticulously audit everyone connected to his fraudulent business accounts. Patricia gasped loudly. How dare you speak to me like that? You are not blood. You are tearing this family apart. No, Mother, I intervened, my voice dropping to a low, absolute calm. You tore it apart 3 years ago at the Thanksgiving table. I simply swept up the pieces and built an empire out of them. Do not ever call this office again. I reached over and pressed the end call button. The silence that fell over my office was absolute and deeply satisfying. I looked at the blinking light on the phone console for a moment before turning my attention back to the computer monitor. Well handled, Jasmine said, her tone returning to its normal businesslike cadence. But we still have a massive problem. The video is gone and your family is terrified, but that does not fix your Series A funding round. The investment firm is spooked, and the venture capital world in this city is a very small, very gossipy circle. The rumor about the intellectual property theft is going to spread by the end of the day. I rubbed my temples, feeling the beginnings of a tension headache. I know. We cannot go back to the firm that just canceled. They are too risk-averse. Even if I prove the algorithm is entirely mine, they will always see me as a liability. We need a different kind of investor. We need someone who does not care about family drama or internet rumors. Someone who only cares about cold hard data and massive returns. Jasmine let out a thoughtful hum through the speaker. Someone who thrives in hostile corporate environments. Someone who is essentially a shark. Exactly, I agreed, opening a new browser window and pulling up a list of top-tier venture capital funds in the city. Who do we know that fits that description? I know exactly who you need to pitch. Jasmine said, the excitement bleeding back into her voice. Nolan. He runs the most aggressive venture capital fund in the entire state. He does not care about public relations scandals. He eats risk for breakfast. I have a contact at his firm. I can get you in a room with him tomorrow morning, but you better be ready, Clara. Nolan does not invest in victims. I smiled, the tension leaving my shoulders. I am not a victim, Jasmine. Set up the meeting. The next morning, I walked into the lobby of Nolan's venture capital firm. It was located on the top floor of a sleek obsidian skyscraper right in the heart of the financial district. The environment was completely different from the conservative investment firm that had panicked and canceled on me yesterday. There were no plush carpets or warm mahogany desks. Everything was steel glass and harsh geometric angles. It felt exactly like walking into a corporate Shark Tank. Jasmine walked beside me, her heavy leather briefcase swinging with a practiced, confident rhythm. She wore a tailored crimson suit that practically screamed dominance. Before we stepped into the building, she had given me a quick rundown on our target. Nolan had built his billion-dollar fortune by acquiring distressed technology companies, cutting out the useless dead weight, and flipping them for massive profits. He was an apex predator in the financial world. He did not care about feelings or public relations optics. He only cared about explosive growth and absolute control. We stepped into the glass elevator and rode it to the 60th floor in total silence. I took a deep breath, centering my focus. The doors opened directly into a massive conference room overlooking the entire city. Sitting at the far end of a 20-foot marble table was Nolan. He was 36 years old, wearing a dark bespoke suit without a tie, his sleeves rolled up to his forearms to reveal a heavy luxury watch. He did not stand to greet us. He was already reviewing a thick digital dossier on his tablet. "Have a seat," Clara Nolan said, his voice deep and entirely devoid of standard corporate pleasantries. "I appreciate you making the time on such short notice." I sat down directly across from him, placing my own tablet on the cold marble surface. Jasmine took the seat to my right, opening her briefcase with a sharp click. "I do not waste time when it comes to securing $50 million, I replied evenly. Nolan leaned back in his chair, studying me with piercing dark eyes. He tossed a paper file onto the center of the table. "Let us skip the standard slide deck presentation. I have already analyzed your financial models overnight. Your core algorithm is brilliant. Your supply chain predictive metrics are outperforming the market standard by 22%. I know how much money this company is going to make, but I do not care about your code today. I care about the absolute circus that erupted on the internet yesterday afternoon." He tapped his tablet screen, and a high-resolution still image of Audrey's tearful face from the viral video appeared on the massive monitor behind him. "Your sister claims you stole the foundational intellectual property of your top 500 company from your ex-husband Nolan," stated flatly, his gaze never leaving my face. The conservative funds ran away the second this hit their timelines. They are terrified of a messy ownership lawsuit dragging down their quarterly reports. Venture capital is about risk management, Clara. Family drama is a highly unpredictable variable. Predictability makes money. Drama loses money. So tell me right now, Why should I hand you $50 million when your own family is actively trying to burn your company to the ground? I did not blink. I did not shift in my heavy leather chair. I looked directly into Nolan's eyes with absolute freezing clarity. Because my family is holding a box of wet matches, I said calmly. My ex-husband is a failed entrepreneur who is currently drowning in a predatory adjustable-rate mortgage that I legally strapped to his back during our divorce. He has no money to hire a corporate litigator, and he has zero proof of concept because the algorithm is entirely mine. He used my sister to create a public relations nightmare, hoping I would panic and throw cash at him to make it go away. Nolan raised a dark eyebrow, clearly intrigued. And what did you do instead? Jasmine leaned forward, placing her perfectly manicured hands on the table. We threatened him with federal prison, she said smoothly. We have concrete proof of his ongoing tax evasion and corporate fraud. Within 10 minutes of receiving our legal notice, they deleted the video and went completely silent. They are cowards looking for a quick payout. Nolan let out a low, rough laugh. It was a sound of genuine amusement echoing in the large room. Most founders would have issued a weak public apology or tried to pay them off to protect the deal. You went straight for the jugular. I do not negotiate with terrorists, Nolan, I said, my voice hardening into steel. Especially not ones who share my DNA. If you invest in this company, you are not just getting my software. You are getting a chief executive officer who knows exactly how to neutralize a threat without a single second of hesitation. The conservative funds want founders who play nice. If you want to dominate the European market before Q3, you need a founder who plays to win. Nolan stared at me for a long moment. The heavy silence in the room was electric. He was weighing my absolute lack of fear against the financial risk. He slowly turned off the monitor behind him. I like your style, Clara, Nolan finally said, a sharp smile forming on his face. You are utterly ruthless, but talk is cheap. If I am going to back you, I need absolute legal immunity from your parasitic relatives. I need a guarantee that this intellectual property is completely insulated from any future attacks. I smiled back, a cold and highly calculated expression. I already have the solution, and it is going to cost my ex-husband far more than his dignity. Nolan leaned forward, resting his muscular forearms on the cold marble table. I am listening, he said. His dark eyes locked intently onto mine. He was a man who appreciated calculated risks, but he needed to see the safety net before he jumped. Jasmine reached into her heavy leather briefcase and pulled out a single neatly typed legal document. She slid it across the polished surface of the table until it rested directly in front of the billionaire venture capitalist. You want absolute legal immunity from any future claims my ex-husband might try to make regarding my intellectual property, I explained, keeping my voice steady and entirely authoritative. The solution is remarkably simple. We do not just sign a standard venture capital investment contract today. We structure this $50 million capital injection as a direct corporate acquisition of the foundational algorithm itself. Nolan looked down at the document, his sharp mind immediately catching up to my overarching strategy. You want my fund to buy the actual patent outright? Exactly, Jasmine chimed in, leaning back in her chair with a deeply satisfied posture. Clara transfers the complete ownership of the core code to your billion-dollar holding company. In exchange, your fund grants her financial technology startup an exclusive and irrevocable license to use, modify, and monetize the software in perpetuity. I watched Nolan's face as he carefully read through the aggressive terms. If Derek ever manages to scrape together enough money to hire a lawyer and file a lawsuit claiming he owns half of my company, I said smoothly, he will not be suing Clara the individual. He will be attempting to sue the holding company of one of the most powerful and ruthless venture capital firms in the country. He will be suing you, Nolan. And I know your corporate legal department will bury him so deep in aggressive litigation, he will never see the light of day. A slow, predatory smile spread across Nolan's face. He picked up the document, his eyes scanning the incredibly dense legal jargon Jasmine had prepared. It was a flawless corporate shield. Derek was expecting a vulnerable female founder he could bully with family guilt and public relations threats. He would never expect to run headfirst into a Wall Street behemoth with unlimited legal resources. "This is brilliant," Nolan said, tossing the document back onto the table. "It is entirely ruthless, and it completely insulates my $50 million investment from your messy divorce fallout. You are weaponizing my corporate legal team to protect your personal assets." "Are you offended by the tactic?" I asked, tilting my head slightly. "I am incredibly impressed," Nolan corrected. He reached inside his tailored jacket and pulled out a heavy silver pen. He did not hesitate for another single second. He signed his name firmly at the bottom of the term sheet, legally binding his firm to the massive deal. "Welcome to the portfolio, Clara. Let us go make an absolute fortune." The massive capital injection hit my corporate operating accounts the very next morning. The impact on my business was immediate and explosive. With $50 million at my disposal, I doubled the size of my engineering team, upgraded our security infrastructure, and launched our European servers 6 months ahead of our projected schedule. We absolutely crushed our international competitors. My company valuations skyrocketed over the following months, cementing my status as a major dominant player in the global financial technology sector. But the most unexpected development of the entire deal was Nolan himself. What started as a strictly professional relationship quickly evolved into a formidable and deeply passionate partnership. We spent countless hours in boardrooms together, mapping out aggressive expansion strategies and dismantling rival firms. He was the first man in my entire life who did not feel threatened by my ambition or my success. He did not want me to shrink myself to make him feel bigger, as Derek always had. He wanted me to take up as much space as possible. 6 months after he signed that initial term sheet, Nolan asked me to marry him. He did not do it with a grand public spectacle. He proposed in the quiet elegance of his penthouse, overlooking the city skyline, handing me a flawless diamond ring that cost substantially more than the suburban house I had surrendered to my ex-husband. I said yes without a single moment of hesitation. We were not just a couple. We were an absolute corporate power vertical. Which brings me directly to tonight. It was a crisp Friday evening in New York City. I stood in front of a full-length gilded mirror in the presidential suite of the Waldorf Astoria Hotel. I was wearing a custom emerald green silk gown that clung perfectly to my frame, with Nolan's diamond resting heavy and cold on my left hand. We were the guests of honor at an exclusive charity gala hosted in the grand ballroom downstairs. It was a strict invite-only event for the absolute elite of the financial world, with a minimum donation requirement of $10,000 just to walk through the heavy brass doors. I adjusted the delicate strap of my gown, feeling completely invincible. I had absolutely no idea that Derek and Audrey had desperately managed to sneak their way into the exact same building. Nolan stepped up behind me, his reflection joining mine in the tall, gilded mirror. He was wearing a sharply tailored black tuxedo that fit his broad shoulders perfectly. He rested his hands on my waist and kissed the side of my neck, his dark eyes meeting mine in the glass. "You look absolutely lethal tonight, Clara," he murmured, his voice a low rumble in the quiet suite. I smiled, turning around to face him. "Lethal is exactly the energy I am going for," I replied, reaching up to adjust his silk bow tie. "Tonight is not just about writing a massive donation check. It is about signaling to the entire financial district that our company is completely untouchable." He caught my hand, his thumb brushing over the heavy diamond on my ring finger. "We are untouchable," he corrected smoothly. "Now let us go downstairs and remind them who owns this city." We left the presidential suite and took the private elevator down to the main floor. The grand ballroom of the Waldorf Astoria was a breathtaking display of old money and new power. Massive crystal chandeliers hung from the vaulted ceilings, casting a warm golden glow over the sea of designer gowns and expensive tailored suits. Waiters in crisp white uniforms moved seamlessly through the crowd, carrying silver trays loaded with vintage champagne and beluga caviar. The air was thick with the low hum of million-dollar deals being casually negotiated over cocktail glasses. As the guest of honor, my entrance did not go unnoticed. The moment Nolan and I stepped through the heavy brass doors, heads began to turn. Whispers rippled through the affluent crowd. 3 years ago, I was just a mid-level corporate executive trapped in a miserable marriage. Tonight, I was the chief executive officer of a top 500 financial technology firm, standing shoulder to shoulder with one of the most ruthless venture capitalists on Wall Street. We were immediately surrounded by a swarm of eager investors, hedge fund managers, and banking executives. They all wanted a piece of the algorithm that was currently revolutionizing global logistics. I handled the room with absolute precision. I did not shrink. I did not defer to Nolan. I commanded the conversations, dropping financial projections and market share statistics with lethal accuracy. Nolan stood slightly behind me, watching with a look of pure, unapologetic pride. He loved watching me dominate. After an hour of intense networking, I finally managed to slip away to the marble bar to get a glass of sparkling water. Jasmine was already there, leaning against the polished counter. She looked magnificent in a structured white blazer dress that contrasted sharply with her dark, flawless skin. She raised her champagne flute as I approached. "You are absolutely terrifying them tonight," Clara Jasmine noted with a wicked grin. "I just heard the chief financial officer of a major international shipping conglomerate tell his board members that you negotiate like a contract killer. I assume you are taking that as a massive compliment." I took my water from the bartender with a slight nod. "It is the only way to survive in this industry, Jasmine. If you show them a single ounce of warmth, they will assume you are weak and try to gut your valuation." Jasmine took a sip of her champagne, her sharp eyes scanning the crowded ballroom. "Speaking of weak and trying to gut you," she said, her tone dropping into a lower, more serious register, "I noticed a very interesting discrepancy at the registration desk when I arrived earlier tonight. This is a strict $10,000 per plate charity dinner. The guest list is heavily vetted." I raised an eyebrow, taking a slow sip of my water. "What did you find?" Jasmine turned to face me fully. "Someone bought a corporate table near the back by the kitchen doors. It was purchased under the name of a low-level marketing firm that recently went bankrupt. But the two guests who checked in under that corporate umbrella were not marketing executives. The names on the security manifest were Derek and Audrey." I felt a cold, sharp spike of adrenaline hit my bloodstream. I set my glass down on the marble bar. "Derek and Audrey are in this building right now." Jasmine nodded, her expression grim. "They must have bought the tickets off a desperate liquidator for pennies on the dollar. Derek has been blacklisted by every legitimate venture capital fund in the city since you launched your counterattack. This gala is packed with out-of-town investors who might not know his reputation yet. He is here to beg for scrap capital to save his dying startup, and he brought your sister as his sympathetic arm candy." I looked out over the sea of wealthy elites. The contrast was almost poetic. They were drowning in debt, facing eviction, and desperately clinging to a toxic mortgage. Yet, they had somehow scraped together enough fake confidence to sneak into a room where people casually dropped $10,000 on a dinner plate. "Do you want me to alert the security team?" Jasmine asked, setting her glass down. "I can have them escorted out through the service elevator in under 3 minutes. They will be tossed into the alley with the garbage where they belong." I shook my head, my eyes scanning the room. "No, let them stay. Let them walk around and pitch his worthless company to men who will laugh in his face. Let them see exactly what I have become." I turned my attention back to the crowded room, scanning the sea of designer tuxedos and expensive silk gowns. It did not take long to spot them. Derek was standing near a massive ice sculpture, looking remarkably out of place in the grand ballroom. He was wearing an outdated tuxedo that was slightly too tight across the shoulders, a clear sign it was rented or pulled from the back of a dusty closet. He was sweating profusely, dabbing his forehead with a white cocktail napkin while aggressively cornering an older gentleman who clearly wanted to escape the suffocating conversation. Audrey stood a few feet behind him. She was wearing a dress that looked like a cheap imitation of a high-end designer gown, the thin fabric pulling awkwardly at the seams. She was desperately trying to make eye contact with the wives of the wealthy investors, flashing her signature influencer smile, but they simply looked right through her. They were a pair of drowning rats trying to climb onto a luxury yacht, completely oblivious to how desperate they appeared to the trained eyes of the financial elite. Jasmine followed my gaze and let out a soft, elegant sound of pure amusement. "He is pitching to Richard Montgomery," Jasmine noted, taking another slow sip of her vintage champagne. "Richard runs a $2 billion hedge fund. He destroys men like Derek for absolute sport. Let us see exactly how this pathetic display plays out." I watched as Derek animatedly waved his hands, no doubt explaining the revolutionary logistics model he had been promising for 3 years. The reality of his startup was a poorly kept secret in the financial district. After he blew the $100,000 he stole from our home equity, he took out massive predatory business loans just to keep up the appearance of a functioning office. But he had no actual proprietary technology. He was essentially running a glorified delivery dispatch service that was bleeding $50,000 every single month. And then there was the house. The adjustable rate mortgage had completely suffocated them, just as Jasmine predicted. She had kept me updated on their financial ruin through her network of real estate contacts. They had missed 4 consecutive payments before the bank finally foreclosed on the property. The eviction process had been swift and utterly brutal. Now they were living in a tiny apartment, dodging daily phone calls from aggressively angry creditors. Tonight was his absolute last stand. He needed a miracle check from an angel investor immediately, or he was going to be forced to declare bankruptcy by the end of the week. Richard Montgomery finally held up a single hand, stopping Derek mid-sentence. Even from across the large room, I could see the cold, hard dismissal on the older investor's face. Richard shook his head, turned his back on Derek entirely, and walked away to join a group of influential banking executives. Derek stood there frozen, his shoulders slumping in absolute defeat. Audrey hurried over to him, her face pulled into a tight, panicked expression as she whispered furiously into his ear. "They are completely desperate," Jasmine observed quietly, leaning her elbows against the marble bar. "He is finally realizing that nobody in this room is going to write a massive check to a man who smells like financial death." The venture capital community talks, Clara. After we sent that cease and desist letter threatening him with the Internal Revenue Service, word got around that his accounting was toxic. Nobody wants to audit a company that might be under federal investigation for tax fraud. He is completely blacklisted. Nolan suddenly appeared at my side, slipping his strong arm naturally around my waist. He handed me a fresh glass of sparkling water with a slice of lemon. "What are we watching?" he asked, his dark eyes scanning the ballroom to follow my line of sight. "My past," I replied smoothly, leaning back against his solid frame. "My ex-husband and my sister managed to buy their way into the room tonight, using tickets from a bankrupt marketing firm. They are currently striking out with the hedge fund crowd." Nolan zeroed in on Derek, his expression hardening into cold calculation. "So that is the man who thought he could steal your intellectual property and threaten your funding round. He looks like a desperate used car salesman. Do you want me to have the event security coordinators throw him out?" It would take exactly one brief phone call to the hotel manager. I took a slow sip of my water. My eyes locked firmly on Audrey as she grabbed Derek's arm and pointed frantically toward the center of the room. She had finally spotted me standing at the bar. I could see the exact moment the realization hit her. The shock on her face was absolute perfection. She took in my custom emerald silk gown, the massive diamond resting on my left hand, and the imposing presence of the billionaire venture capitalist standing proudly with his arm around my waist. "Let them stay," I told Nolan, a sharp, cold smile touching my lips. "They have been telling the internet that I am a thief and a total failure. I think it is time they walk over here and say it directly to my face." I watched as Audrey marched across the grand ballroom, her cheap imitation silk dress rustling with every aggressive step. She was dragging a reluctant, heavily sweating Derek by the wrist, weaving recklessly through the crowd of billionaires and hedge fund managers. They were heading directly for the massive 10-tier crystal champagne tower, situated right next to our spot at the Marble Bar. I did not move an inch. I simply took another calm sip of my sparkling water. Nolan tightened his grip slightly on my waist, his dark eyes tracking their approach with the cold precision of a predator observing cornered prey. "Well," Audrey sneered as she came to a halt right in front of us. She looked me up and down, her eyes lingering with obvious jealousy on the heavy custom diamond ring on my left hand. "I suppose it is easy to pretend you are a successful tech founder when you find a rich man to pay your bills. You always did know how to manipulate people to get your way, Clara." I handed my glass back to the bartender and gave my sister a look of pure, unadulterated pity. "Audrey, you are standing in a room where the floral centerpieces cost more than the remaining balance on your foreclosed mortgage. Do not try to insult me about money. It just makes you look even more out of place than you already do." Derek stepped forward, trying to puff out his chest to regain some semblance of masculine authority. He completely ignored me and looked directly at Nolan, extending a sweaty hand. "I do not believe we have formally met. I am Derek. Clara and I used to be married before she decided to prioritize her career over our family. I run a highly disruptive logistics firm that is currently seeking visionary investors." Nolan did not take the offered hand. He did not even shift his posture. He simply looked at Derek's outstretched hand as if it were a piece of garbage resting on the pristine marble floor. Derek slowly lowered his arm, a deep flush of humiliation creeping up his neck as the wealthy guests standing nearby paused their conversations to watch the painfully awkward exchange. "I know exactly who you are, Derek," Nolan said, his voice dropping into a low, terrifying register. "You are the man who forged his wife's signature to secure a predatory loan. You are the man who commits tax evasion to buy cheap jewelry for his mistress. And you are the man who desperately tried to sabotage my $50 million investment with a pathetic internet stunt." The color completely drained from Derek's face. His eyes widened as the realization hit him like a physical blow. He recognized Nolan. Every desperate startup founder in the city knew Nolan's face from the covers of major financial magazines. He finally understood that the man holding my waist was not just a wealthy romantic partner. He was the apex predator of the venture capital world. "You are Nolan," Derek stammered, taking a full step backward and nearly knocking into the base of the towering champagne display. "You funded her Series A. I bought her intellectual property," Nolan corrected smoothly, his voice carrying the dangerous edge of a sharpened blade. "Which means when you sent your little wife on the internet to claim that the algorithm was stolen from your private research, you were not just defaming Clara. You were publicly accusing my billion-dollar holding company of corporate theft. My legal team found that highly offensive." Audrey realized the conversation was rapidly spiraling out of their control. She desperately tried to pivot the narrative, raising her voice so the surrounding affluent guests would hear her. "It does not matter who he is. You still stole Derek's ideas, Clara. We have text messages. We have proof that you discussed logistics software with him while you were married. He is entitled to half of everything you built. You owe us." Jasmine stepped out from my right side, her presence instantly demanding the attention of the small crowd that was beginning to form around us. She looked at Audrey with the cold detachment of a seasoned litigator examining a hostile witness. "I am Jasmine, Clara's corporate counsel," she announced, clearly making sure her voice carried. "And I can assure you that discussing broad industry concepts over dinner does not equate to proprietary ownership of a complex predictive algorithm. If you genuinely believe you have a legal claim, I invite you to file a formal lawsuit tomorrow morning. But I must warn you, if you bring a frivolous claim against a company owned by this venture capital fund, we will countersue you for malicious prosecution and every single cent of legal fees. We will garnish your future wages until the day you die." Derek was breathing heavily, his eyes darting frantically between me, Nolan, and Jasmine. He was completely trapped, publicly exposed in a room full of the exact people he needed to impress. but cornered animals often do incredibly stupid things. Derek's desperation suddenly twisted into a blind, reckless fury. You think you have won because you have a billionaire boyfriend and a fancy lawyer? Derek spat, his voice rising in volume, echoing off the marble pillars. But you are forgetting the laws of the state, Clara. Everything created during the marriage is considered a joint marital asset. I do not care what papers you signed with him. I am taking 50% of your company. Nolan released my waist and took a single, deliberate step toward Derek. The entire ballroom seemed to go completely silent. Nolan looked down at Derek with an expression of absolute surgical precision. You are threatening to take 50% of a top-tier tech firm, Nolan said, his voice carrying effortlessly across the silent room. Yet you are wearing a rented tuxedo that is 2 sizes too small, and you snuck into a $10,000 a plate charity dinner using tickets registered to a bankrupt marketing agency. Derek swallowed hard, his throat bobbing visibly. The veins in his neck were bulging. He tried to stand his ground, but the sheer difference in their power was palpable. Nolan did not stop. He reached into his tailored jacket and pulled out his phone. Let us talk about your financial leverage, Derek. You want to sue my holding company for 50% of Clara's intellectual property. That kind of corporate litigation requires a minimum retainer of $500,000 just to file the initial discovery paperwork. How exactly do you plan to pay for that? Are you going to use the equity from the house the bank just foreclosed on? Audrey let out a sharp gasp, her hands flying to her mouth. Several wealthy investors standing nearby began to murmur, casting disgusted looks at the desperate couple. Or perhaps Nolan continued, taking another slow step forward, forcing Derek to back up against the champagne tower. Perhaps you plan to sell your car. Except my analysts ran a full background check on you the moment you tried to sabotage our funding round. You are exactly 3 months behind on the lease payments for that Porsche you drive around to pretend you are a successful founder. The repo men are actively looking for it. In fact, I am fairly certain you parked it 3 blocks away tonight just to avoid the valet running your license plates. The humiliation was absolute and entirely public. Richard Montgomery, the billionaire hedge fund manager Derek had been pitching to just minutes ago, let out a loud mocking laugh from across the bar. Derek was completely stripped of his fake entrepreneurial mask. He was standing naked in front of the most powerful people in the city, exposed as a fraud, a tax evader, and a man who could not even afford his own car. You have no money, Nolan stated coldly, his dark eyes stripping away the last remaining shreds of Derek's dignity. You have no legal standing. You have absolutely nothing. You are a parasite who tried to drain a brilliant woman, and when she cut you off, you starved. Do not ever approach my fiancée again. Do not ever speak her name in public. If you so much as look in her direction, I will personally buy the debt of every single creditor you owe, and I will make sure you spend the rest of your pathetic life paying me back at the maximum legal interest rate. Nolan turned his head slightly and caught the eye of the general manager of the Waldorf Astoria, who had been hovering nervously near the edge of the crowd. Martin Nolan called out, his voice sharp and commanding. The manager immediately rushed forward, practically bowing to Nolan. Yes, sir. How can I assist you tonight? Nolan gestured vaguely toward Derek. This man and his companion are trespassing. They are not on the approved guest list, and they are harassing the invited donors. Please have security escort them out through the service elevator. I do not want them walking through the main lobby. The manager turned to Derek, his professional demeanor instantly replaced by cold authority. Sir, I must ask you to leave the premises immediately. If you do not comply, I will have you physically removed and arrested for trespassing. Derek was shaking. His face was a mask of pure, impotent rage. He looked around the room, realizing that every single influential person in the financial district was watching his absolute destruction. There was no coming back from this. No investor would ever take his calls again. His reputation was entirely incinerated. He looked at me, his eyes wide and wild with desperation. You think this is over? Clara, he seethed entirely, losing whatever small amount of control he had left. You think you can just discard me and keep all the money? I know the law. I will find a lawyer who works on contingency. I will tear your entire company apart. I stepped out from behind Nolan, my emerald silk gown brushing against the polished marble floor. I looked at the man I had once promised to spend my life with. There was no anger left inside me. There was only absolute freezing indifference. "Find a lawyer, Derek," I said smoothly. "I highly encourage it. Because the moment you file that paperwork, Jasmine will hand your tax fraud file over to the federal government. You can try to sue me from a federal prison cell." The silence that followed my statement was absolute. The soft clinking of crystal glasses and the low hum of classical music seemed to fade entirely into the background. Derek stared at me, his mouth opening and closing, without a single sound coming out. The threat of federal prison was not a theoretical corporate maneuver. It was a cold, hard reality, staring him directly in the face. He finally understood that he had brought a butter knife to a war zone, and I had just ordered a targeted airstrike on his entire existence. But the true spectacle was not Derek. It was my sister. Audrey had been standing slightly behind him, clinging to the delusional hope that his aggressive posturing would somehow yield a massive financial settlement. When I mentioned the tax fraud file and federal prison, the carefully constructed illusion she had been living in shattered into a million irreparable pieces. She looked at Derek, her eyes wide with a sudden creeping horror. "You lied to me," Audrey whispered, her voice trembling so violently that the wealthy guests standing nearby leaned in closer to witness the collapse. "You told me the company was just going through a temporary cash flow problem. You told me we were going to get millions of dollars from Clara tonight. You told me the foreclosure was a banking error." Derek could not even look at her. He kept his eyes fixed firmly on the polished marble floor, his shoulders completely caved in. Audrey let out a sound that was half sob and half scream. She shoved him hard in the chest, her hands balling into fists. "You are going to prison!" she shrieked, entirely abandoning any attempt to maintain her public dignity. "You dragged me out of a beautiful home and put me in a disgusting apartment, and now you are going to leave me with nothing while you rot in a federal cell. You ruined my life, Derek. You ruined everything." Derek finally snapped, turning on her with a vicious sneer. "I ruined your life. You are the one who demanded the diamond bracelets and the luxury vacations while my company was bleeding out. You are the one who pushed me to refinance the house so you could keep playing wealthy influencer on the internet. We are in this together, Audrey." She slapped him. The sharp crack of her hand connecting with his cheek echoed loudly against the vaulted ceilings of the grand ballroom. Several investors gasped, stepping backward to distance themselves from the explosive domestic dispute playing out in the middle of their exclusive charity gala. Audrey did not care who was watching anymore. She turned away from the man she had stolen from me 3 years ago and looked directly at me. The arrogant, entitled smirk she had worn when she first marched over to the Champagne Tower was completely gone. In its place was sheer, pathetic desperation. "Clara," she pleaded, taking a step toward me. Her fake designer dress looked even cheaper under the brilliant glow of the crystal chandeliers. "Clara, please. You have to help me. I am your sister. I did not know about the tax fraud, I swear to you. I did not know he forged your signature on the mortgage. He manipulated me just like he manipulated you." I looked down at her, feeling absolutely nothing. Not pity, not anger, not even a lingering sense of sibling loyalty. She was just a stranger standing in my way. "He did not manipulate you, Audrey," I said, my voice smooth and entirely devoid of warmth. "You saw a man you thought was on the verge of extreme wealth, and you took him. You wanted my life, so I gave it to you. I gave you the house, the husband, and the debt. You do not get to come crying to me just because you suddenly realized the prize you won was actually a financial landmine." "But I am blood," she sobbed, the tears streaming down her face, ruining her carefully applied makeup. "Mom and Dad cannot afford to help me. They mortgaged their own house to pay for Derek's lawyers. If he goes to prison, I will be on the street. Please, Clara. You have $50 million. You can give me a job at your company. You can give me a place to live, just a small apartment. Please do not leave me like this." I tilted my head, studying her pathetic display. I am not leaving you, Audrey. You left me. You sat at my Thanksgiving table 3 years ago, wearing jewelry bought with my credit card, and told me you were taking my husband. You made your bed. Now you have to sleep in it even if that bed is in a homeless shelter. Two large security guards in dark suits suddenly appeared behind them, summoned by the hotel manager. They did not say a word. They simply grabbed Derek by his upper arms and firmly turned him toward the service exit. Another guard stepped between Audrey and me, gesturing toward the back hallway. No, Audrey screamed, thrashing against the security personnel as they began to forcefully escort them out of the ballroom. Clara, please. You cannot do this to your own family. I turned my back on her before she even finished the sentence. I picked up my glass of sparkling water from the bar and took a slow sip. The sound of her hysterical screaming grew fainter and fainter until the heavy kitchen doors swung shut, cutting off her voice entirely. The ballroom was completely silent for a brief moment, and then, as if nothing had happened at all, the classical music swelled and the billionaire investors resumed their conversations. The trash had been taken out. I woke up the morning after the charity gala feeling an immense sense of closure. The memory of Derek and Audrey being physically dragged out of the Waldorf Astoria through the service doors played in my mind like a beautifully directed film. I sat at the marble kitchen island of Nolan's penthouse, sipping a cup of black coffee and watching the morning sun reflect off the glass skyscrapers of the financial district. I genuinely believed the war was over. I assumed that the absolute public humiliation they suffered last night would force them to retreat into permanent obscurity. I completely underestimated the sheer destructive power of a cornered narcissist with absolutely nothing left to lose. When I arrived at my corporate headquarters at 9 o'clock sharp, the atmosphere on the executive floor was incredibly tense. Jasmine was already waiting inside my office. She was pacing back and forth in front of my floor-to-ceiling windows, holding a digital tablet with a vice-like grip. She did not bother with a morning greeting. She walked directly over to my desk and dropped the tablet onto the polished mahogany surface. "You need to watch this right now," Jasmine said, her voice completely stripped of its usual confident edge. I thought throwing them out of the gala would be the end of it. But Derek did not go home to lick his wounds. He spent the entire night hunting for a shark, and he actually found one. I picked up the tablet and tapped the screen. It was a live broadcast from a prominent local news network streaming directly from the front steps of the downtown civil courthouse. Derek was standing behind a podium entirely surrounded by reporters. He was no longer wearing the cheap rented tuxedo. He was dressed in a conservative navy suit, projecting the image of a serious, wronged businessman. Standing directly to his right was Audrey, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. And standing to his left was a man I recognized immediately from various high-profile corporate extortion cases. It was Richard Vance, a notoriously aggressive contingency lawyer who specialized in bleeding tech companies dry. Wait, I cannot use the name Richard Vance based on my strict guidelines. I will call him Gordon. Gordon was a notoriously aggressive contingency lawyer who specialized in bleeding tech companies dry. My ex-husband leaned into the cluster of microphones. For the past 3 years, I have remained silent, while my former wife built a billion-dollar empire using my proprietary research. Derek read from a prepared statement, his voice perfectly modulated for maximum sympathy. During our marriage, I conceptualized and developed the core logistics algorithm that currently powers her top 500 company. I shared my blueprints with her in total confidence. She took my life's work, abandoned our marriage, and leveraged my intellectual property to secure $50 million in venture capital funding. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. He was not just crying on the internet anymore. He was laying the groundwork for a massive, heavily publicized corporate lawsuit. Gordon, the sleazy bulldog lawyer, stepped up to the podium and adjusted his glasses. He looked directly into the camera lenses. "This morning, we are officially preparing to file a massive civil lawsuit against Clara and her corporate holding company. Under state law, any intellectual property conceived or developed during a marriage is considered a joint marital asset. We are not asking for a small financial settlement. We are legally demanding a full 50% ownership stake in her entire financial technology company, retroactive to its inception. They do not have a single shred of proof, I said to Jasmine, my voice remaining entirely flat despite the rising anger in my chest. He is a fraud. He never wrote a single line of code in his life. Keep watching, Jasmine ordered, crossing her arms tightly over her chest. The real threat is coming right now. On the screen, Gordon stepped aside to let another person approach the podium. My breath hitched slightly. It was my mother. Patricia stepped up to the microphones looking solemn and deeply conflicted. She wore a modest pearl necklace and a simple black dress, playing the role of the reluctant but fiercely honest matriarch to absolute perfection. I am Patricia Claris' mother, she said, her voice trembling just enough to sell the performance. It breaks my heart to stand here today and speak against my own daughter, but I cannot sit back and watch an innocent man be destroyed. I was at their house frequently during the final year of their marriage. I personally witnessed Clara going through Derek's private office. I heard them discussing the logistics algorithm. I saw her taking his research notes. Derek is telling the truth. I paused the video, the image freezing on my mother's utterly deceitful face. The silence in my executive office was deafening. My own mother had just committed public perjury to help my ex-husband steal 50% of my corporate empire. Jasmine let out a heavy sigh, dropping into one of the leather chairs opposite my desk. Derek has no money to fight us, Clara. But Gordon works on contingency. He takes cases with zero money down if he smells a massive payout at the end. And a sworn eyewitness affidavit from the founder's own mother, claiming she saw the theft occur, is exactly the kind of leverage a shark like Gordon needs. What is their immediate play? I asked, my mind racing through defensive corporate strategies. Gordon is not just going to file a standard lawsuit, Jasmine warned, leaning forward. He is going to use your mother's sworn testimony to petition a judge for an emergency corporate injunction. He wants to freeze all of your company assets and halt your European expansion until the ownership of the algorithm is settled in court. He is trying to completely paralyze your business so you will panic and hand over millions of dollars just to make him go away. This is not a public relations stunt anymore, Clara. This is a fight for the absolute survival of your company. Jasmine had barely finished outlining the disastrous implications of an emergency asset freeze when the heavy glass doors of my office swung open. My executive assistant stepped inside looking completely drained of color. He was holding a thick manila envelope and his hands were shaking. A process server just dropped this off at the front desk, he said, his voice trembling as he walked toward me. He demanded I hand it directly to you and said it was a matter of extreme legal urgency. I took the envelope from his shaking hands and tore it open. I dumped the thick stack of legal documents onto my desk. The bold black lettering at the top of the very first page confirmed every single warning Jasmine had just issued. It was an official summons to appear before the commercial division of the state Supreme Court. Derek and his sleazy lawyer Gordon had not just held a press conference for the sake of public relations. They had filed the injunction petition the exact second the news broadcast ended. Jasmine snatched the heavy stack of documents from my desk and began rapidly scanning the dense legal jargon. Her dark eyes darted back and forth across the pages, her jaw clenching tighter with every single paragraph she read. He is moving incredibly fast, she muttered quickly, flipping to the second section of the filing. He requested an expedited emergency hearing, and the judge actually granted it. We are officially ordered to appear in court this coming Monday morning. That gives us exactly 3 days to prepare a bulletproof defense before the judge decides whether to completely freeze your corporate accounts. 3 days, I repeated, leaning back in my heavy leather chair and staring blankly at the ceiling. They timed this perfectly, Jasmine. They waited until our European expansion was in its absolute most vulnerable funding transition. If our operating assets are frozen on Monday, we miss the major international vendor payment deadlines on Tuesday. The European server contracts will instantly default. The company valuation will crash overnight, and the fund will bleed millions of dollars in penalties. As if summoned by the mention of his massive financial investment, Nolan strode into my office. He did not bother knocking. He had clearly seen the live press conference on the television screens in the executive trading room. His dark eyes were burning with a cold and highly controlled fury. He walked straight over to my desk and looked down at the legal summons resting on the polished wood. "I see the extortion attempt has officially commenced," Nolan stated, his voice a low and highly dangerous rumble that filled the quiet room. "My corporate legal team is already mobilizing on the top floor. I have 10 of the most aggressive litigators in the country ripping into Gordon's entire professional background as we speak. We are going to bury that lawyer in retaliatory countersuits so deep he will permanently lose his license to practice law in this state." Jasmine shook her head, tapping a specific page near the back of the thick summons. "A retaliatory countersuit will not stop the emergency injunction on Monday, Nolan." Gordon covered his legal bases perfectly. He attached a sworn and notarized affidavit from Clara's own mother. In a preliminary injunction hearing, judges simply look for a reasonable cause to pause operations and preserve contested assets. A mother providing sworn testimony against her own daughter provides massive reasonable cause. If the judge reads this document and believes there is even a 10% chance Clara stole the algorithm during her marriage, he will grant the total asset freeze just to be safe. Nolan turned to face me, his expression tightening with absolute resolve. "Then we need to prove your mother is actively committing perjury. We need to completely destroy her credibility before the judge even considers reading her fabricated statement." Did Derek have any actual technical capability to write this complex code? I let out a sharp and entirely humorless laugh. Derek cannot even format a basic financial spreadsheet without asking his assistant for technical support. The idea that he conceptualized a predictive logistics algorithm is absolutely laughable to anyone who actually knows him, but proving a negative in 3 days is incredibly difficult in a court of law. We need to prove positive ownership. We need to show the judge exactly when and where the algorithm was physically created. Jasmine pulled out a yellow legal pad and clicked her pen, her litigator instincts taking full control. "Clara, you built the initial prototype during the 6 months immediately following your divorce. You were living in that cheap rented co-working space downtown. Did you leave any digital footprint that definitively proves you started coding only after you walked out of the marital home?" I closed my eyes, mentally retracing the absolute blur of those exhausting first few months. I worked entirely on an encrypted offline server to protect the proprietary data. But I did have weekly check-in meetings with an independent data architect who helped me stress test the early mathematical models. We communicated exclusively through a secure encrypted portal, and I paid his invoices directly out of my new personal checking account, the account Derek never had access to. "Find the data architect," Nolan ordered, immediately pulling out his phone to text his legal team. "Jasmine, I want you to secure a subpoena for those specific bank records today. We are going to build a timeline so incredibly rigid that Gordon's fake narrative shatters into pieces the very moment he speaks." I stood up from my desk and walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows. I looked out over the sprawling city, feeling a cold and hard resolve settle deep into my bones. My mother had finally crossed the ultimate line. She had chosen to actively participate in the destruction of my life to serve her golden child. There would be absolutely no mercy left for any of them. "When we walk into that courtroom on Monday," I said softly, staring at my own reflection in the glass, "I do not just want to win the injunction hearing. I want to ensure my mother leaves that building in handcuffs for perjury." Jasmine did not waste a single second. She opened her laptop right there on my desk and began drafting the emergency subpoenas. We needed the encrypted emails, the wire transfers, and the sworn deposition of the independent data architect who had helped me build the original framework. Every single piece of paper had to be perfectly organized and completely undeniable. While Jasmine was locked into her aggressive legal preparations, Nolan walked over to the windows and crossed his arms. His mind was clearly working through the financial logistics of Derek's sudden attack. "There is a missing piece to this puzzle," Nolan said, his voice low and analytical. "Gordon takes massive corporate cases on contingency, yes, but a preliminary injunction hearing of this magnitude requires extreme upfront capital. We are talking about filing fees, emergency court dockets, and an army of paralegals working over the entire weekend to prepare the briefs. Gordon is greedy, but he is not a charity. He would have demanded a minimum cash retainer of at least $150,000 just to file that paperwork this morning. Derek is completely broke. Audrey is broke. Where did the cash come from? Jasmine stopped typing. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard as her eyes widened in sudden realization. She quickly minimized her legal documents and opened a secure portal tied to the county property registry. Her keystrokes were rapid and aggressive. It takes exactly 2 minutes to pull public property records if you know exactly what to look for. Jasmine stared at the screen, a cold and utterly ruthless smile slowly spreading across her face. Clara, Jasmine said, turning the laptop so Nolan and I could see the screen. Your mother did not just provide a perjured affidavit to help them. She is completely bankrolling the entire extortion attempt. I leaned over the desk and looked at the highlighted digital document. It was a brand new deed of trust registered just yesterday afternoon. My mother, Patricia, had taken out a massive second mortgage on her own home. The 4-bedroom colonial house where I grew up, the house my father had worked his entire life to pay off before he passed away, was now heavily leveraged. She had pulled out $200,000 in cash. She mortgaged the family home. I said the words feeling heavy and incredibly bitter in my mouth. She risked her own retirement and the roof over her head just to pay a sleazy lawyer to destroy my company. She is absolutely desperate to save Audrey from the consequences of her own actions. Nolan observed his tone devoid of any sympathy. She knows Derek is facing federal tax evasion charges. She knows they have nowhere to live. In her twisted mind, stealing half of your company is the only way to save her golden child from total ruin. The private line on my desk phone suddenly began to ring. I did not even need to look at the caller identification display to know exactly who it was. I reached over and pressed the speaker button. Clara, my mother's voice filled the quiet executive office. She sounded exhausted but entirely defiant. I assume you have received the court summons by now. I received it, Mother, I replied, keeping my voice terrifyingly calm. I also just received the updated property records for your house. $200,000 is a massive gamble on a man who cannot even afford the lease on his own car. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. She was clearly not expecting me to uncover the financial trail so quickly. I did what I had to do to protect my family. Patricia snapped back, her voice shaking with righteous indignation. You left us with absolutely no choice. You humiliated your sister in front of the entire city last night. You threatened Derek with prison. We are just taking back what rightfully belongs to this family. The algorithm was created during the marriage. You are committing perjury, Mother, I said flatly. You are lying under oath in a Supreme Court filing. That is a federal crime. I will testify to whatever I need to testify to, she countered desperately. Gordon assured us that if we freeze your company assets on Monday, your investors will panic. Your board of directors will force you to settle out of court to save the European expansion. We do not even want 50% anymore, Clara. We will drop the lawsuit and the injunction right now if you agree to a $10 million cash settlement. Just give us the money and we will walk away forever. I looked at Nolan. He was smiling. It was a dark, terrifying smile. I looked at Jasmine. She was already drafting the countermotion. You mortgaged your entire life to buy a loaded gun, Mother, I said smoothly. But you completely forgot to check if there were any bullets in the chamber. I will not give you $10 million. I will not give you 10 cents. I will see you in court on Monday morning. And when I am done exposing every single lie you just filed, the bank is going to take your house too. I pressed the button and ended the call. The battlefield was completely set. I looked out at the sprawling metropolis below my window. For 33 years, I had allowed that woman to make me feel completely inadequate. I had spent my entire childhood trying to earn her approval, while she handed every ounce of her affection to a sister who contributed absolutely nothing to the world. And now she was literally betting her own shelter on my destruction. Jasmine closed her laptop with a sharp snap. I am heading to the courthouse to file the emergency subpoenas for the bank records, she announced, grabbing her heavy leather briefcase. I will have my private investigators track down your independent data architect by midnight. Gordon thinks he is ambushing a defenseless tech founder. We are going to show him what happens when he steps into the ring with a fully armed corporate legal department. Nolan stepped up behind my chair and rested his hands on my shoulders. I will have my forensic accountants prepare a full audit of Derek's remaining assets, he said, just in case there is anything left for us to take when we countersue them into the ground. I nodded, feeling a deep and powerful sense of absolute clarity. The extortion attempt was not a crisis anymore. It was an opportunity. Monday morning was not just going to be a legal defense, it was going to be a corporate execution. The immediate fallout hit the corporate news networks by noon. My assistant quickly informed me the board of directors demanded an emergency meeting. I walked straight into the glass-walled conference room. The mahogany table was filled with conservative men in expensive suits. These were the early investors, the risk-averse bankers who joined before Nolan arrived. Their faces were pale tablets open to headlines about my ex-husband demanding 50%. A senior board member named Harrison slammed his hand on the table. "Clara, this is an absolute disaster," he barked, his face flushed with panic. "The European expansion contracts have a strict morality and stability clause. If a Supreme Court judge freezes our operating accounts on Monday morning, those contracts are automatically voided. We will lose hundreds of millions in projected revenue." Harrison pointed a trembling finger at the news broadcast playing on the wall monitor. "Your mother is going to testify under oath that you stole the core algorithm. Whether it is true or not does not matter to the market. The market hates uncertainty. Gordon Derek's attorney just called. They will drop the injunction and the lawsuit right now for a $10 million settlement. Pay them, Clara. Pay them out of your personal equity and make this go away before the weekend." I remained standing at the head of the table. I did not raise my voice. I did not show a single ounce of fear. "If I pay them $10 million today," I said, looking directly into Harrison's panicked eyes, "they will be back for $20 million next year. You do not negotiate with corporate terrorists, Harrison. You eradicate them." "This is not a negotiation," another board member chimed in nervously. "This is risk management. $10 million is a fraction of our overall valuation. If we go into that courtroom on Monday and the judge rules in their favor on the preliminary injunction, the company bleeds to death by Tuesday." "Paying a fraudulent claim is not risk management," I countered, my voice hardening into absolute steel. "It is a massive admission of guilt. If I cut a check to a man who has zero technical background simply because he threw a tantrum on the courthouse steps, every single competitor we have will smell blood in the water. They will know this board is weak. They will know we surrender at the first sign of bad press. I will not allow my company to be perceived as a vulnerable target." Nolan sat at the far end of the table, entirely relaxed, his dark suit perfectly tailored. He had not spoken a single word since the meeting began. As the largest institutional investor, his silence was deafening. Harrison looked down the table, desperately seeking an ally. "Nolan, you cannot possibly support this reckless gamble. She is risking your $50 million investment over a personal vendetta." Nolan slowly picked up his pen and tapped it once against the mahogany wood. The sharp sound instantly silenced the entire room. "I do not back cowards, Harrison," Nolan said smoothly, his dark eyes sweeping across the terrified board members. "Clara is right. You pay an extortionist once you become their permanent payroll. My legal team has already reviewed the filings. Gordon is betting heavily on the shock value of a mother's betrayal to force a quick settlement. He made a fatal miscalculation. He assumed we would panic." I stepped forward, placing my hands flat on the table. "Listen to me very carefully," I told the board. "I am the chief executive officer of this company. I built this algorithm from scratch while eating cheap noodles in a rented basement long after I walked away from that parasitic marriage. I have the digital footprint to prove it. Jasmine is securing the bank records and the independent witness testimony right now. I will absolutely not settle for $10 million. I am going to invite them to this very room on Monday morning and completely dismantle their entire extortion plot. I am going to expose Gordon for filing a frivolous claim and ensure the federal government steps in to handle Derek's tax fraud. I need absolute silence and total trust from this board for the next 72 hours. If you cannot handle the pressure of playing in the major leagues, I will gladly authorize Nolan to buy out your shares right now at a 10% discount. The room went dead silent. Nobody reached for their pens to sell their shares. The panic in their eyes slowly shifted into a reluctant, awestruck respect. They had wanted a safe, predictable founder. Instead, they got a wartime executive who was about to drop a nuclear bomb on her own family. I left the glass conference room and walked directly back to my private office. The board of directors was completely neutralized. I pushed open the heavy oak door and found Jasmine sitting at my desk, her laptop connected to the massive wall monitor. The screen was filled with complex financial flowcharts and federal regulatory codes. Nolan followed closely behind me, shutting the door and locking it. "We have 72 hours until the injunction hearing," I said, taking a seat on the leather sofa. "Tell me you found the kill shot, Jasmine." Jasmine spun my executive chair around, a deeply predatory smile lighting up her flawless features. "I did not just find a kill shot, Clara. I found a way to make the federal government pull the trigger." Gordon thinks he is playing a standard asset division game. He is entirely blind to the corporate securities nightmare he just stumbled into. Nolan walked over to the monitor. "What did you find?" Jasmine tapped her keyboard, bringing up scanned pitch decks and email transcripts. "These are the investment solicitations Derek has been circulating to minor hedge funds over the past 6 months. Derek has no actual assets, so he needed massive collateral to guarantee short-term bridge loans to keep his startup alive." I leaned forward. "What collateral did he use?" "He used you." Jasmine pointed to a highlighted paragraph. "Specifically, your company." Derek signed legally binding loan agreements with private lenders, stating he was the silent co-founder of your top 500 financial technology firm. He pledged his fabricated 50% equity in your algorithm as collateral to secure over $2 million in shadow debt. The sheer audacity of his fraud hung heavy in the quiet office. He had actively committed financial crimes to defraud private investors, soliciting investment capital by falsely claiming ownership of a completely separate corporate entity is a massive violation of federal law. Nolan stated, his voice icy. "It is textbook securities fraud. The Securities and Exchange Commission will absolutely crucify him." "Exactly," Jasmine confirmed. "By filing that Supreme Court injunction this morning claiming ownership of the algorithm under oath, Derek officially documented his own securities fraud in the public record. The moment we hand these private loan agreements over to the Securities and Exchange Commission, he is looking at 10 to 15 years in a federal penitentiary. But we need to stop the emergency injunction on Monday morning," I reminded them, keeping my focus strictly on immediate corporate survival. "Sending him to prison next year does not save our European expansion contracts next week." Jasmine let out a rich, dark laugh. "That is where my mergers and acquisitions strategy comes into play. I am not a criminal lawyer. I am a corporate shark. And corporate sharks do not wait for the justice system. We buy the ocean." Jasmine pulled up the profiles of the private lenders Derek had defrauded. "These are small, highly aggressive shadow credit firms. They hold the $2 million in debt Derek owes, and they also hold the second mortgage your mother just signed to pay Gordon. They are notoriously underfunded and desperate for liquid cash." Nolan immediately understood the play. A vicious smile spread across his face. "You want my venture capital fund to buy the shadow credit firms?" Jasmine nodded. "I want you to initiate a hostile corporate takeover of his lenders before the weekend is over. If your holding company acquires these firms, you officially own every single piece of debt Derek and your mother have ever signed. You become their absolute financial master." I stood up, the devastating reality of Jasmine's strategy washing over me. "If we own the debt, we can instantly call the loans due the second they violate the terms of their fraudulent collateral." Yes, Jasmine said. Gordon is expecting us to meet him in a courtroom on Monday morning to beg a judge for our company. Instead, we invite Gordon, Derek, Audrey, and your mother to this exact office for a private settlement meeting on Sunday night. We let them demand $10 million. And then I finish smoothly. We show them that we own their mortgages, their cars, and their freedom. Gordon either withdraws the injunction immediately, or we call the federal authorities and ruin his legal career for participating in securities fraud. Nolan pulled out his phone, already dialing his acquisitions team. I will have the purchase contracts for those lenders finalized by midnight. The trap was officially set. My ex-husband wanted half of my empire. He was about to find out that my empire was coming to collect everything he had left. He thought he could manipulate the legal system to steal my life's work. Instead, he had blindly walked straight into a fully orchestrated corporate slaughter. The weekend that followed was an absolute masterclass in aggressive corporate acquisitions. While my ex-husband was likely celebrating his perceived victory in his cramped rented apartment, Nolan's legal and financial teams were executing a flawless hostile takeover. They did not sleep. They worked in staggered shifts, aggressively negotiating with the desperate private lenders who held Derek's shadow debt and my mother's second mortgage. By early Sunday morning, the ink was dry on the final transfer documents. Nolan's billion-dollar holding company officially owned the two shadow credit firms outright, which meant by extension we now legally owned every single cent of debt my family had recklessly accumulated. With the financial guillotine securely hoisted into place, it was time to invite them to the execution. Jasmine made the phone call to Gordon on Sunday afternoon. I sat across from her at my desk, listening as she put on an absolute clinic in tactical deception. She intentionally made her voice sound tight, breathless, and laced with complete corporate panic. She told Gordon that my board of directors was absolutely terrified of the Monday morning injunction. She claimed our European investors were threatening to pull out and that I was desperate to reach a quiet off-the-record cash settlement before the courts opened. Gordon practically purred through the phone line. He was so blinded by his own arrogance and the prospect of a massive contingency fee that he completely swallowed the bait. He enthusiastically agreed to bring his clients to my corporate headquarters at 8 o'clock that evening to finalize the payout. The executive boardroom was a magnificent display of modern corporate intimidation. It was a massive glass-walled rectangle situated on the top floor, offering a panoramic view of the illuminated city skyline. A long table made of solid black granite dominated the space. I took my seat at the absolute head of the table. Nolan sat to my right, projecting the silent, immovable power of an apex predator. Jasmine sat to my left, her heavy leather briefcase resting on the granite surface, holding the physical documents of their absolute financial ruin. At exactly 8 o'clock, the heavy glass doors swung open. My executive assistant escorted them into the room. The sheer smugness radiating from their group was almost physically repulsive. Derek walked in first, wearing the same conservative navy suit from his press conference. He had his chin tilted up, trying to look like a conquering tech visionary, finally claiming his throne. Audrey was right behind him, clinging to his arm, wearing a brand-new designer dress she had clearly purchased on credit in anticipation of tonight's payout. My mother walked in next, her face a mask of tragic reluctance, though her eyes darted greedily around the luxurious boardroom. Finally, Gordon strutted in his cheap cologne, preceding him holding a slim leather portfolio. Gordon did not wait for an invitation to sit. He aggressively pulled out a chair near the center of the table and dropped his portfolio onto the granite. Derek and Audrey took the seats directly across from me, while my mother sat slightly farther down, entirely avoiding my direct gaze. "I appreciate you being reasonable, Clara." Gordon began, a slimy, condescending smile plastered across his face. "When your lawyer called me this afternoon, I told my clients that litigation is always an ugly business. We are all adults here. You have a massive European expansion to protect, and my clients simply want fair compensation for the intellectual property Derek generously provided to you." I kept my expression entirely blank. I rested my hands flat on the granite table. And what exactly constitutes fair compensation in your mind, Gordon? Gordon opened his portfolio and slid a single sheet of paper down the length of the table. The original offer I gave your board on Friday was $10 million. But given the strength of our Supreme Court petition and the sworn eyewitness testimony of your own mother, my clients have reassessed the value of their claim. To completely withdraw the injunction and sign a permanent non-disclosure agreement, we require a lump sum wire transfer of $25 million by 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. Audrey let out a soft, excited breath. Derek tried to suppress a triumphant smirk, looking at me as if he had just checkmated a grandmaster. My mother finally looked at me, giving a small, self-righteous nod, as if this extortion was a necessary life lesson I desperately needed to learn. $25 million. I repeated softly, letting the massive number hang in the quiet, climate-controlled air of the boardroom. Yes, Derek finally spoke up, leaning forward and resting his forearms on the table. It is more than fair, Clara. You get to keep your CEO title and your company. We get the payout I deserve for giving you the original algorithm. Just sign the settlement. We all know you have the cash. I looked at Derek, then at my mother, and finally at Gordon. I slowly picked up the single sheet of paper containing their massive extortion demand. I did not rip it up. I simply folded it neatly in half and pushed it to the side. There is a slight problem with your demand. Gordon? I said, my voice dropping into a register of absolute freezing authority. You assumed you were walking into a negotiation. But you are not here to negotiate. You are here to surrender. Gordon let out a harsh, abrasive laugh that bounced off the glass walls of the executive boardroom. He leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms, looking at me with a mixture of amusement and utter disdain. Surrender? Clara, let me remind you exactly who holds the cards here. He tapped his index finger against the folded $25 million demand. By 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, your corporate operating accounts will be frozen. Your European vendors will default. You have no leverage to demand a surrender. You are just a desperate founder trying to put on a brave face. Jasmine smiled. It was a cold, predatory expression that completely transformed her face. She reached for the brass latches on her heavy leather briefcase. The sharp click echoed loudly in the tense silence of the room. She reached inside and pulled out two thick bound folders holding a stack of freshly notarized legal documents. She slid the first folder straight down the center of the granite table until it stopped directly in front of Gordon. She slid the second folder toward my mother. I highly suggest you read the executive summaries before you make another threat, Gordon. Jasmine said, her voice echoing with absolute authority. Gordon snatched the folder with an arrogant flick of his wrist. He clearly expected to see a counteroffer or perhaps a desperate plea for a payment plan. Instead, his eyes landed on a massive corporate acquisition contract. His thick brow furrowed in deep confusion as his eyes darted across the dense legal jargon. What is this? Gordon demanded, looking up at Jasmine. This is a corporate buyout agreement. What does this have to do with my clients? Nolan leaned forward, resting his muscular forearms on the table. It is a notice of assignment. Gordon Nolan answered, his voice a low, terrifying rumble. As of 2 o'clock this morning, my holding company successfully completed a hostile takeover of Apex Credit Solutions and Vanguard Financial. Derek physically flinched. The color instantly drained from his face, leaving his skin a sickly pale gray. Those were the exact two shadow lenders he had used to secure his $2 million bridge loans. Audrey looked back and forth between Derek and Nolan, her face twisted in pure confusion. She lacked the basic financial literacy to understand what had just happened. What does that mean? Audrey whispered, tugging urgently at his suit sleeve. Derek ignored her. His eyes were locked on Nolan, wide with sudden creeping horror. I will explain it to you, Audrey, I said, keeping my voice perfectly smooth and measured. It means that Nolan now owns every single cent of debt your husband has accumulated over the past 6 months. The $2 million he borrowed from shady private lenders to keep his fake logistics company afloat and to buy you those designer dresses. He now owes that money directly to us. A sharp gasp echoed from the other end of the table. My mother, Patricia, had finally opened her folder. She was staring down at a copy of the deed of trust for her own home. Her hands were shaking so violently, the heavy paper rattled against the granite surface. "You bought my mortgage," Patricia asked, her voice breaking into a fragile, terrified whisper. "Your house is now collateral for a loan owned entirely by my venture capital fund, Mother," I replied, looking directly into her panic-stricken eyes. "You gambled the roof over your head to finance a lawsuit against me. Now I hold the deed to your house." Gordon swallowed hard, but his greed pushed him to try and salvage his massive contingency fee. "This is a cheap intimidation tactic," Gordon sneered, tossing the folder back onto the table. "Buying their personal debt does not negate the intellectual property lawsuit. You still have to face the Supreme Court tomorrow morning. My clients still have a sworn affidavit proving Derek created the algorithm. Owning their debt does not change the fact that he owns 50% of your company." Jasmine leaned forward, resting her chin on her steepled fingers. "Oh, we are very aware of the lawsuit, Gordon. In fact, we absolutely love the lawsuit. Because in your Supreme Court filing you included sworn affidavits from Derek claiming he legally owns 50% of Clara's company." "Because he does," Gordon snapped back aggressively. Jasmine shook her head slowly, her smile widening into something truly dangerous. "No, he does not. But he certainly told Apex Credit Solutions that he did when he applied for those $2 million loans. He used an asset he did not legally own as collateral to secure massive funding from a private lender. The trap finally sprang shut." I watched the exact moment the realization hit Gordon. The sleazy lawyer suddenly stopped breathing. His arrogant posture collapsed entirely. He was a greedy man, but he was not a stupid one. He immediately understood the catastrophic legal implications of what Jasmine had just laid out. "That is federal securities fraud, Gordon," I said, my voice dropping into a deadly serious register. "And by filing that Supreme Court petition this morning, you officially entered his fraudulent claims into the public record. You just documented his federal crime for the Securities and Exchange Commission. And worse, Gordon, you are now listed as the attorney of record actively facilitating the extortion attempt based on those fraudulent claims. You are officially an accessory to a federal crime." Gordon stood up so fast his chair scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. He threw his hands in the air, taking a massive step away from the table, as if the legal folders were suddenly radioactive. "I had absolutely no knowledge of his private loan applications," Gordon stammered, his voice pitching up an entire octave. "I was retained on contingency strictly for the intellectual property dispute. I relied entirely on the sworn affidavits provided by my clients. I am not a party to any securities fraud." "Look at how quickly the shark turns into a minnow," Jasmine mocked, leaning back in her chair. "You can tell that to the federal investigators, Gordon. But you and I both know the State Bar Association will suspend your license the second the investigation opens. Unless, of course, your intellectual property claim is completely legitimate." Gordon grasped at the lifeline. "Yes," he practically shouted, pointing a trembling finger at Derek. "He created the algorithm." Patricia swore under oath that she saw Clara steal the notes. "If he actually owns the company, the collateral was legitimate, and there is no securities fraud. The lawsuit is still valid." I slowly shook my head, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction as I prepared to completely dismantle the final pillar of their delusion. I reached into Jasmine's open briefcase and pulled out a slim white folder. I tossed it onto the center of the table. "That is a sworn and notarized deposition from an independent data architect," I stated, my voice cutting through the tension like a scalpel. "I hired him to help me build the foundational framework of my predictive algorithm. Attached to his testimony are the encrypted server logs, the digital timestamps from our cloud hosting provider, and the wire transfers I sent him from my private bank account." I turned my gaze directly to my mother. She shrank back into her leather chair, her face pale and covered in a thin sheen of cold sweat. "You swore under oath that you witnessed me stealing Derek's research notes during the final year of our marriage," I said, my tone entirely devoid of any daughterly affection. "You claimed you saw me going through his home office." Patricia opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out. The first line of code for this algorithm was written on February 14th. I continued enunciating every single word with absolute precision. That was exactly 3 months after I surrendered the house to Derek and moved into a downtown hotel. I did not even own a personal laptop capable of running the necessary mathematical simulations until late December. The foundational model you claim Derek invented did not even exist in the physical universe while we were married. Jasmine tapped her manicured fingernail against the granite table. The digital forensics are absolute and completely undeniable. We hired a third-party cybersecurity firm to verify the timestamps before we invited you here tonight. They concluded with 100% certainty that no part of Clara's proprietary software was developed prior to the legal dissolution of her marriage. Your entire lawsuit is based on a chronological impossibility. Gordon looked at the white folder on the table. He did not even bother to reach for it. He knew it was over. He turned slowly to look at my mother. His eyes were burning with a vicious, unrestrained fury. "You lied to me," Gordon hissed, his voice dripping with venom. "You signed a sworn affidavit under penalty of perjury and you completely fabricated the timeline. You used me to file a fraudulent injunction." Patricia began to cry. Genuine panicked tears streamed down her perfectly powdered cheeks. I was just confused about the dates, she sobbed, wiping her face with trembling hands. "It was a long time ago. I must have misremembered." "I am an older woman, Gordon. You cannot expect my memory to be perfect. The federal judge is not going to care about your memory," Patricia Jasmine said coldly. "You committed perjury to facilitate a multi-million-dollar corporate extortion plot. That carries a mandatory minimum sentence in a federal penitentiary. You are not going to a low-security facility. You are going to a real prison." Derek slammed his fists onto the granite table. "This is insane," he shouted, his voice cracking with utter desperation. "You cannot do this, Clara. You cannot send your own mother to prison. You cannot destroy my entire life over a stupid business dispute. Just give us the $10 million and we will tear up the lawsuit right now. We will sign whatever non-disclosure agreement you want. We will disappear. You still do not understand what is happening in this room." "Derek," Nolan finally spoke, his deep voice echoing off the glass walls. "You are no longer in a position to offer us anything. Your lawsuit is dead. Your lawyer is currently calculating how quickly he can turn you over to the authorities to save his own license, and your fake logistics company is officially bankrupt." Nolan picked up his own tablet and swiped his finger across the screen. "Which brings us directly to the matter of the $2 million you currently owe my holding company." Nolan slid his tablet toward the center of the table. The screen displayed the exact financial contracts Derek had signed with Apex Credit Solutions. "You borrowed $2 million. Nolan began, his voice cold and precise. "You agreed to an exorbitant 25% interest rate because you had zero actual credit. And in the fine print of these shadow loans, there is a very specific clause regarding fraudulent collateral." Derek stared at the tablet, his breathing shallow and rapid. He looked like a man standing on the trapdoor of a gallows waiting for the lever to be pulled. If the collateral used to secure the loan is found to be falsified or legally invalid, Nolan quoted directly from the digital document, the entire principal balance plus all accrued interest becomes immediately due in full. There is no grace period. There is no negotiation. You committed securities fraud to obtain this money, Derek. That instantly triggers the default clause. "I do not have $2 million, Derek whispered, his voice cracking horribly. "I spent it. It is gone." "We know," Jasmine replied cheerfully, leaning forward and resting her elbows on the granite. "Which is why we are executing the asset seizure protocol immediately. By 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, my legal team will freeze your personal bank accounts. We will seize the remaining inventory of your fake logistics company. We will repossess the leased vehicles you have been hiding from the repo men. We will garnish whatever pathetic future wages you manage to earn. You will be left with absolutely nothing but the cheap suit currently on your back." Audrey let out a sharp, hysterical sob. She grabbed Derek's arm, shaking him violently. "Tell them they cannot do this. Derek, do something. You told me we were getting $25 million. You promised me we were going to be rich. Derek was paralyzed. The sheer magnitude of his financial destruction had completely short-circuited his brain. He had tried to steal a tech empire and had instead handed his entire existence over to a billionaire who despised him. He could not even look at his wife. Nolan was not finished. He turned his dark, penetrating gaze toward my mother. Patricia pressed her back firmly against her leather chair, trying to make herself as small as possible. The arrogant righteousness she had walked into the room with had entirely evaporated. Patricia Nolan said, his tone devoid of any mercy. Your second mortgage was heavily underwritten by the same parent company that funded Derek's bridge loans. When my holding company acquired those lenders this weekend, we ran a full audit on the newly issued debt. You stated on your loan application that the funds were for urgent home renovations. Patricia swallowed hard, her eyes darting toward Gordon for help. But the sleazy lawyer was aggressively packing his leather portfolio, completely abandoning his clients to save himself from the federal crosshairs. Instead, Nolan continued, his voice echoing off the glass walls. You immediately wired the $200,000 to Gordon's law firm to fund a fraudulent corporate lawsuit based on perjured testimony. That constitutes mortgage fraud. It is a material breach of the loan agreement. We are calling your second mortgage due in full, immediately. I cannot pay it back, Patricia cried out, her hands flying to her face. I gave it all to Gordon. I do not have $200,000 sitting in the bank. Then we will foreclose on the house. I stated, my voice echoing with finality in the large boardroom. The bank will seize the property by the end of the month. You will be evicted from the home my father built. Clara, please, my mother begged, tears streaming down her face, completely destroying her carefully applied makeup. You are my daughter. You cannot throw your own mother out onto the street. Where will I go? Where will Audrey go when they take their apartment? You can go wherever people who commit federal perjury go, I replied, feeling an immense, profound sense of liberation wash over my entire body. You chose your golden child. You chose to risk your home to steal mine. You sat in front of a news camera and lied to the world to destroy my life's work. You made your investment, mother. Now you have to live with the absolute total loss. Gordon snapped his portfolio shut. He looked absolutely terrified. I am withdrawing the injunction, Gordon announced loudly, his eyes darting toward the glass doors as if he wanted to sprint out of the building. I am filing the paperwork to drop the lawsuit the second the courthouse opens tomorrow morning. I will refund the $200,000 retainer to Patricia. I want absolutely no part of this fraud. You will do exactly that, Jasmine instructed, pointing a manicured finger at the lawyer. And you will also have your client sign this ironclad non-disclosure agreement and a permanent waiver of any future claims against Clara, her company, or her intellectual property. Jasmine tossed a thick stack of papers across the granite table. They landed with a heavy, satisfying thud right in front of Derek. Sign it right now, Jasmine demanded, her voice ringing with lethal authority. If a single signature is missing before you leave this room, I am sending the entire fraud file to the Securities and Exchange Commission, the State Bar Association, and the federal prosecutor before midnight. You either sign away your fake claims forever, or you all go to federal prison. Derek stared at the thick stack of legal documents resting on the black granite table. His hand hovered over the heavy silver pen Jasmine had tossed beside the paper. He looked at Audrey, whose face was stained with dark mascara and tears, and then at my mother, who was silently weeping into her hands. There was no grand defiance left in him. The illusion of his power had been entirely dismantled and reduced to absolute rubble. He had played a dangerous game of corporate extortion and lost everything he ever possessed. With a severely trembling hand, Derek picked up the pen. He did not read the terms. He simply flipped to the signature pages and scrawled his name on every single line Jasmine had marked with a red tag. He signed away his fake claim to my algorithm. He signed away his right to ever speak my name in public. He signed a legally binding admission that his intellectual property lawsuit was completely fabricated and that he held absolutely no equity in my company. When he finished, he pushed the documents toward Audrey. She stared at the paper as if it were coated in poison. She looked up at me, her eyes completely bloodshot. "You do not have to be this cruel." Clara Audrey whispered, her voice barely audible in the massive boardroom. "We have nothing left. You won. Is that not enough for you?" I stood up from my executive chair and looked down at the sister who had spent her entire life trying to tear me down. "I am not being cruel, Audrey. I am simply letting you experience the natural consequences of your own greed. 3 years ago, you sat at my dining table and smiled while you stole my husband. Tonight you tried to steal my company. You wanted to play in the major leagues. This is exactly how the major leagues operate. Sign the paper." Audrey let out a broken sob, picked up the pen, and signed her name next to Derek's. She pushed the folder to my mother. Patricia did not look up. She kept her eyes fixed on the granite surface as she signed her name, officially surrendering any future claim against me and securing the total loss of her own home. Gordon immediately snatched the signed documents. He checked the signatures with frantic speed, shoved his copy into his leather portfolio, and stood up. "I advise my former clients to exit this building immediately," Gordon said, his voice completely devoid of his previous arrogance. He turned and practically sprinted out of the glass doors, desperately trying to put as much distance as possible between himself and the federal fraud case he had narrowly escaped. I pressed a button on the boardroom console. The heavy glass doors opened again, and 3 large corporate security guards stepped into the room. "Escort these 3 individuals out of the building," I instructed the lead guard. "They are no longer permitted on any property owned by this corporate entity. If they ever return, have them immediately arrested for trespassing." Derek stood up, his posture completely broken. He did not say a single word as the security guards stepped behind him. Audrey linked her arm through his, crying softly as she was forced to walk toward the exit. Patricia stood up last. She paused at the door and turned to look back at me one final time. "You used to be such a sweet girl, Clara," Patricia said, her voice shaking with bitter resentment. "I do not even recognize the cold woman standing in front of me today." I smiled, feeling the heavy burden of my childhood completely lift from my shoulders. The sweet girl you remember was just a bank account you thought you could drain forever. She died the night you kicked her out of her own house. I highly suggest you focus on packing your belongings, Mother. The bank is going to lock the doors to your house very soon." Patricia turned away, her shoulders shaking as the security guards escorted them into the hallway. The heavy glass doors clicked shut, sealing them out of my life forever. The absolute silence that followed was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows and looked out at the vibrant city lights. Jasmine let out a long, satisfied sigh, snapping her briefcase shut with a sharp click. "That was the most flawless corporate execution I have ever witnessed," Jasmine said, pouring herself a glass of water from the crystal pitcher on the table. "They walked in demanding $25 million, and they walked out entirely bankrupt." Nolan stepped up behind me, wrapping his strong arms around my waist and pulling my back against his chest. He kissed the side of my head. "You handled that perfectly, Clara. They will never touch you again." I leaned back into him, looking down at the heavy diamond ring on my left hand. I had lost a cheating husband, a toxic sister, and a manipulative mother. But in return, I had gained an absolute empire, a fiercely loyal best friend, and a man who matched my ambitions step for step. Thank you so much for listening to my story. If you have ever had to cut off toxic family members to protect your own peace and your own success, I would love to hear your experiences in the comments below. Please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories about surviving betrayal and building an empire from the ashes. Remember, the best revenge is never a shouting match. The absolute best revenge is massive, undeniable success. See you in the next video. Betrayal by those closest to us, especially our own family, is one of the most profound emotional wounds we can ever experience. In Clara's story, we witness a chilling but necessary reality. Sometimes the people who are supposed to love and protect us are the ones most willing to sacrifice our well-being for their own selfish comfort. The most powerful lesson to extract from this narrative is that sharing DNA does not give anyone a free pass to disrespect your boundaries, drain your resources, or sabotage your future. Society constantly pressures us to forgive, forget, and accommodate toxic family members under the guise of unconditional loyalty. However, Clara's journey teaches us that true personal empowerment requires radical detachment from those who actively exploit us. When she calmly walked away from her dining table, surrendering her house and her cheating husband to her sister, she was not giving up. She was strategically cutting off the heavy dead weight that had been anchoring her down for years. We often mistakenly negotiate with toxic people, hoping they will eventually recognize our worth. But Clara demonstrated that you absolutely cannot reason with pure entitlement. Instead of engaging in petty emotional warfare, she channeled her pain into building an untouchable empire. Her ultimate victory was not simply in legally dismantling her family's massive extortion attempt. It was in realizing that her incredible success and peace of mind were entirely independent of their validation. She proved that establishing ironclad boundaries is the absolute highest form of self-respect, and that we must stop setting ourselves on fire just to keep toxic people warm. Evaluate the relationships in your own life today and fiercely cut ties with anyone who demands your sacrifice without ever honoring your worth.